Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Nottinghamshire and City of Nottingham Fire and Rescue Authority meeting on not Friday the 16th, but Friday the 23rd of September here at Highfields Fire Station. And thank you to colleagues for hosting us today. Just before and apologies for starting slightly later than the 12 o'clock start time. We're a few minutes late, so apologies to colleagues who are waiting for us to start. Just before we start the formal business of the meeting, I just wanted to first of all say at the outset, on behalf of the Fire Authority and on behalf of the service, our sincere condolences to the royal family, to King Charles, and to pay our respects to Queen Elizabeth II. I think Queen Elizabeth II was the only monarch I ever knew, and clearly gave a life of service and devotion to the country, whatever your view may be about hereditary monarchy or otherwise. She had a very, very close relationship not only with our armed forces but also with our emergency services, of which our colleagues obviously who work day in, day out and put their lives at risk in Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service are amongst them. From her service as Princess Elizabeth during the Second World War right to the final week of her life when she was clearly gravely ill but still carried out her constitutional duties, she's been a constant for this country and a period of continuity at times when perhaps we've dealt with political instability. I said earlier this week that she wasn't respected because of her constitutional title. She was respected because of her considered compassion. And she wasn't respected because she was a hereditary monarch. She was respected because she was a human being with feelings and with a family as well. I think this country will greatly miss her. I think our emergency services, of whom she was a first-class champion, will greatly miss her. So may the Lord keep her safe, and God save the King. And we extend our condolences and respects to the wider royal family. And both myself and the Chief have written to the King on his accession to the throne to outline that. The second person I'd just like to pay respects to before we start is Councillor Eddie Cubley, the untimely death of Councillor Eddie Cubley, who was an outstanding servant as a county councillor for the Eastwood division. My condolences, Jonathan, to you and your colleagues from Eddie's group, and we had an opportunity to pay tributes to him and respects to him at the county council yesterday. But obviously, particularly here at the Fire Authority, he was first class. He was quiet, he was self-assured, he was gentle. He didn't say a lot, but I said yesterday, believe me, as chair of the Fire Authority, if he ever asked you a question in full Fire Authority, you had to be on your game, because he asked you in a searching manner on behalf of the residents that he served in Eastwood and more broadly in Nottinghamshire. And I really, really enjoyed not only my time serving with him on the authority, but actually the conversations I had with him outside of the meetings about his personal life and the way he engaged. I found him to be a really, really honest, genuine, heartfelt human being, and an untimely death and a big loss, I think, not just to the county council but to this authority. So to Eddie's family, I'd like to extend my heartfelt sympathies to them. I'll invite any colleagues who may want to say anything either about the late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II or about Councillor Eddie Cubley, and then I'm going to suggest just before we start the formal business, after I've done that we have a minute's silence that we stand and have a minute's silence for both of them. So I'll just give anybody an opportunity if they do want to speak on either of those two people. Councillor Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, first of all, completely endorse yourself for your comments and condolences about the Queen, and obviously God save the King. In terms of Councillor Cubley, I mean, I say Eddie, I mean, I spoke to him just the night before, and, you know, when you do get that call the next morning and find out there, it just kind of puts things into context, you know, when he's talking to you about looking forward to holidays and stuff he's going to be doing, and then you find out he's passed away, kind of, I think, puts life into context. So a lot of people certainly did for me on something I was planning to do. In terms of the Fire Authority, absolutely, he was passionate about it. You know, with the amount of conversation I had with him, he used to ring me up all the time. We had chats with the county council here as well. You know, he really was passionate about what he did here, and really was looking forward to having more responsibility on the reasons that a committee changed just before his passing was because he really wanted to get stuck into another portfolio area and to develop. So I think that shows his commitment to the cause. So he will be missed by all of us, and of course, our condolences to his family and friends. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Any other colleagues? Councillor Drosny.
Thank you, Chair. Not to add a lot because we had as you say, a long debate yesterday at County Council. I do, on behalf of the independent group, want to echo your comments, certainly about Her Majesty, and welcome that you've sent a letter on behalf of the authority to the King. With regards to Councillor Cubley, of course, he was on the committee that I chaired here, and as you say, I want to echo those comments as well. He was a very diligent and engaged member of the Community Safety Committee. Not often in the meetings, but afterwards, as I said yesterday, he spent a long time going through the detail of it and stopping me getting home for my lunch often. But real levels of detail that not many members have engaged in, and I think, as you say, it'll be a loss to that committee because of the interest he took in it. So on behalf of our group, we would like to pay our condolences to the Conservative group and to Eddie's family, of course.
Thank you, Councillor Rosnick. Anybody else? Okay, so I'll ask colleagues, everybody in the room, if we can stand in a minute's silence for Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and also Councillor Eddie Cubley. Thank you very much, colleagues. Okay, we'll move on to the formal business on the agenda that we've got before us today. With colleagues' indulgence, I am going to move agenda item 12, which is perhaps one of the most substantive items on the agenda today, to immediately after having dealt with Chair's announcement. So effectively it will become agenda item 6. And the rest of the agenda will then flow from that and effectively be moved down by one item. So item 1 on today's agenda is changes to membership, and I'll ask the clerk to update colleagues in terms of this item.
There are 3 changes to membership from Nottinghamshire Council. Councillor Neal replaces Councillor Trimble, Councillor Hayes replaces Councillor Gorkhan, and Councillor Candola replaces Councillor Heaton.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Any other comments on that item? No? Okay, item 2 then is apologies for absence. Kath or Malcolm? I think everybody else here is present. Item 3 then on our agenda is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest from any members or officers in relation to any items on today's agenda? I'm not seeing any indications from anybody. Item 4 then is the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of July. For confirmation, they're contained on page 3 in the yellow pages in our agenda pack. Are there any comments or questions in relation to the minutes? Are people happy to approve them as a correct record and an accurate record? I'll move them. They agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Item 5 then is Chair's announcements. In terms of the recent hot weather response and other incidents the service has been dealing with, I want to thank on behalf of the Fire Authority the huge efforts during the height of the summer weather by the service, and I know a number of Fire Authority members took the opportunity to pay their thanks to their individual watchers and stations. Both the firefighters and all those who supported them deserve our gratitude and our thanks. And in particular, the major incident that took place at Ranskill, which required resources for, I think, over 35 days, from the service, and certainly all the feedback I got from the local community there was that the service was absolutely first class, provided reassurance to the community, and it was a pretty big incident. You could certainly see it from my home in Red Hill in terms of the smoke. So on behalf of the authority, thank you for the response that the service has provided over recent months, when I know that the pressure has been on. In terms of meeting with members of Parliament and chief executives, the Chief Fire Officer and I have been meeting, as the authority is aware, with local members of Parliament and the chief executives of local councils, providing an opportunity to discuss the great work of the service, more of which about later in terms of Her Majesty Inspectorate of Constabulary's recent inspection of the service, but more importantly, the growing financial pressures and highlighted budget deficits in coming years, some of which obviously is contained in today's agenda. Those conversations have been mature, they've been sensible, they've been about the policies and the politics, not about the personalities, which for me is absolutely where the debate should be in this authority. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we allow the discussion about the decisions we're taking to descend into personal attack. I've been on the receiving end of some of that this week, more about later, and I don't think it helps anybody. We're dealing with an emergency service here that's dealing with people's lives and the risk of people's lives, and I think the debate should be about the policies and about the politics, not about the personalities. And I would appeal for colleagues in the room when we're having the discussions today to make sure that we stick to the issues and that we don't play the person, but that we play the ball. And my experience in my discussions with colleagues, MPs across the county and city from different parties has been that they have engaged in a mature fashion. They understand the financial pressure that the service is under, and they understand the need for them to collectively make an argument to government, to ministers, about the investment that this service needs to see if it's going to continue to provide the first-class service that it's provided in recent years. We obviously have the 7th of October planned seminar with members and MPs, so a reminder to please take the time to engage. I think it's a great opportunity for us to have conversations between councillors. Obviously, Police and Crime Commissioner Commissioner Henry will be with us if she's able to, and has been very supportive in some of those conversations that we've been having. But it's a chance to share that experience, obviously, from our local insight as elected members with members of Parliament, and make sure that they are briefed about the arguments they can then make back to government ministers and in the House of Commons. Joint letters are being drafted to the Home Office and Fire Minister outlining the financial challenges for the authority. And again, I put on record my thanks to members of Parliament to agreeing to that. I think a cross-party representation back to government about the need for further investment is much more powerful than people making partisan representations to government ministers, to the Prime Minister and to the Chancellor. There is a national awards ceremony, which is always a really nice evening to see the fantastic work that colleagues do in the fire service and to celebrate that. Members will shortly be receiving their official invitations to this year's awards. It will be taking place on Thursday, the 24th of October at the Albert Hall in Nottingham from 6 for 6:30 arrival, 7 o'clock start. All members are welcome to take part in the event and to be part of the celebrations, and it's always an absolutely fantastic evening. And finally, in terms of Chair's announcements, we will be taking part in Southern Minster Emergency Services Carol Service on the evening of Tuesday the 13th of December, and again, members are welcome to attend, and please could you contact Leanne, who will then be able to let the Minster know in terms of numbers attending for the service. If there are no further contributions in terms of chairs and it, Councillor Zadrozny?
Sorry, Chair, just because I was absent in July, I wanted just to add some support to your comments about the grass fires and the pressure the service were under at that point. And I think they do deserve the thanks that you've just given them. It was immense, and particularly I know senior officers who weren't on duty, Craig and Mick at Canada, were responding to all manner of phone calls from members to keep us updated, and so that we could liaise with district and boroughs as well, and other services like the police to try and coordinate efforts. There was a point where there was a enormous country park fire in Ashfield, and the service were exemplary. And even to this week where we had a large fire at Amazon, Mick was straight on the phone to let me know all the details so that I could calm down the local social media. So I just wanted to echo your thanks to senior management, but of course to those on the ground that were been working so hard to make sure that we did provide a first-class service.
Thank you, Councillor Zadrozny. Any other comments? Not seeing any other indications. So, with colleagues' permission, I'm going to bring forward item 12, which is the Futures 2025 Efficiency Strategy Update, to the next item on the agenda, and then we'll move down from there. Before I introduce the Chief Fire Officer, I think who's going to introduce the report, there are some questions from colleagues from the FBU. I think there are 3 questions, if I'm right. So I'll call on the FBU to ask the respective questions, and then I'll give a response. I think the first question I've got is on section 1.5 of Futures 25. Who will be asking the question? You're welcome.
Steve Tucker, serving firefighter at Worksop and chair of Nottinghamshire FBU. The service is currently proposing to remove 1 whole-time appliance from London Road, 1 whole-time appliance from Stock Hill, and the night-time cover from West Bridgeford, all to meet budgetary requirements. The posts that this service wish to remove are already vacant, and due to a lack of recruitment by management, there are minimal financial savings to be made by removing these posts before the end of the financial year. Given that we have already faced a 10% reduction in posts, which is well above the 1.6% average across our sector, and that we have one of the lowest financial costs per head in this country, we have already felt the devastating effects of the cuts that have already been imposed on this service, which is why the FBU applaud and support the proposal to revert Ashfield Fire Station to a whole-time 224 station. However, we do not, cannot and will not accept that the same flawed and failed model should be implemented at another station, one which does not even have the resilience of an on-call appliance to even attempt to maintain any level of fire cover between the hours of 7 p.m. and 8 a.m. Will this authority agree to postpone all the recommendations currently proposed until after the financial budgets have been officially announced by the government?
Thank you very much for your question, Steve, and to colleagues from the FBU for presenting this question and other questions today. The difficult choices that the authority is considering from this report and the backdrop of many years of resource reductions is unwelcomed, I repeat, unwelcomed, by all of those involved. The proposals recommended are for implementation from April 2023 onwards and have been preceded by in-year temporary savings in 2022-23, including the management of staff numbers. The move of resources to Ashfield takes a service-wide view of risk and a least worst option approach, meaning these resources are required to be taken from other existing locations and still balance the budget. And I just pause there for a moment. There is a legal requirement on this fire authority placed on us by central government to legally balance the budget. We have reserves, but we can only use them once. So any other savings have to come out of revenue savings. And unless and until the government uplifts our grant, we are one of the worst affected fire services in the country. The situation is not going to get any better. Perhaps something the Chancellor might like to reflect on while he's on his feet in the House of Commons today, making the major financial statement that he's making. Government grant only equates, I repeat, only equates to approximately 7.5 million. And to delay decisions will build up a larger financial issue to address within a much shorter time period. Let me put it another way. We'll be creating ourselves a burning platform because we're not going to get any help from the government. It should be reiterated that this decision seeks to go out to public consultation, pending any financial settlements being announced. And let me just pause and say that I entirely agree with you, Steve, and the FBU, and I will be making strident and strong representations to the new incoming minister to make sure that we get an uplift in our settlement in December. I'll also be making it very, very clear that it's wrong that this service, less wealthy than some of the other services last year, was not allowed the flexibility to increase council tax. Other areas were allowed to increase their council tax by a flat £5. We weren't. Ask me why Nottinghamshire wasn't, and yet home county services that are in much affluent areas in the countries were, and the answer is, I don't know. But government ministers will have to answer for why they decided that was the case. To delay this decision would mean the consultation work would not be completed prior to the requirement, the legal requirement, to put forward a balanced budget proposal, and I know you know this, Stephen, colleagues know this from the FBU, at the February 2023 Fire Authority meeting. So I will reiterate that decisions that are being taken today are going out to public consultation, and I will say, unapologetically from the Chair, if we agree to go out to public consultation on some of the very difficult decisions today, I would encourage everybody, not least the FBU, to make sure that your representations are heard loudly and strongly in that consultation. And I can give you an assurance, and I can only speak for myself in this room, we are not making a decision today. And I have been crystal clear with the Chief Fire Officer that that decision will come post the public consultation and the internal consultation that has been carried out, should that be the way that members wish to take the vote today. So I hope that addresses your first question, colleagues from the FBU, and Steve, thank you for asking the question. Question 2 then is, as per the table which is reflected in 2.28 of the report. Who will be asking this question?
Yeah.
Welcome, Mark.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Mark Stillwell, Nottinghamshire FBU Brigade Secretary and East Midlands Regional Chair. The FBU believe that this report is incomplete, misleading and does not show the full impact of the proposed cuts. In recent times, the service has faced spate conditions. It has relied on our members being recalled to duty, sacrificing their rest days to crew appliances and keep fire cover at a safe level. How is it that this Fire Authority can agree to further endanger lives of the public and the safety of fire crews by removing even more resilience from an already stretched and struggling workforce? Whilst it is clear for everyone to see that the proposed cuts will result in a reduced fire cover for the City of Nottingham, what the report does not show is the impact on the availability of the aerial ladder platform currently stationed at London Road. At the time when we should be learning from the horrific events of Grenfell and Sherwood Towers, the service will further look to reduce high-rise capability and delay the attendance of sufficient resources of a large-scale area within this county. Again, this table does not show the impact of attendance times for the second or third appliances, which in turn has an impact on current safe working practices, putting our firefighters and members of the public at greater risk of harm. We iterate that this information supplied at this moment in time is incomplete, misleading and dangerous. Does the Fire Authority believe that they have sufficient information to make an informed decision with the limited information presented to them in this paper? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your question. Authority members and political group leaders have been provided with briefings, information and opportunities through wider Fire Authority seminars to receive information from the Chief Fire Officer. And it is with deep regret, and believe me, I say this personally when I say this, it is with deep regret that we are here at all today to consider such proposals. The financial picture has been well documented over many months, and I don't need to tell you this, Mark, you've been making these representations alongside your colleagues for a number of years to central government, and indeed years, in numerous reports presented to both the full authority and the Finance and Resources Committee here at the authority. The Chief Fire Officer is clear that these proposals, if supported, will obviously have an impact. There is no hiding from that, will obviously have an impact, including which emergency resources will attend and the likely increase in response times. And there's no hiding from that. They are laid out, aren't they, today in the report before us. If these recommendations are supported, a full implementation plan will be developed. This will, of course, include risk assessments that seek to address any significant change to working practices and the training needs of staff in future. With regards to the ALP query, the FBU will be aware from its conversations with the Chief Fire Officer that this is a point already being considered in the implementation plan and that no reductions are proposed. I repeat, no reductions are proposed. Further work will include how these will be deployed in the future. The FBU will also be aware of the commitment to provide 2 new ALPs. I hope that addresses, Mark, your question, and thank you for asking the question. The third question then that I have is a question on section 2.3.1 of the Futures 25 report. Who will be asking this question, Mark?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. The proposals call for a further 10% reduction to be made to operational firefighting crews. A significant reduction in the number of appliances directly correlates to a significant increase in fire calls for the remaining appliances, meaning longer working durations and inadequate rest periods between incidents. The other work, such as safe and well visits, business safety checks, site-specific information visits, school visits, dice and cray events, which the survey has stated will be divided between the remaining appliances and neighbouring stations, will undoubtedly force crews to leave their area without fire cover in an effort to try and meet these unobtainable targets set out by the CRMP, which was based on a workforce with increased staffing levels and higher number of appliances. Will the Fire Authority commit to using the reserves to stop this devastating impact to both firefighter safety and the delivery of essential emergency service to the public, placing the Fire Authority in a better position for requesting for future funding? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your question. The report itself recognises the impact and redistribution of workloads on the service and for the service, and in the recommendations laid out by the Chief Fire Officer, demands upon the resources that will be available are also being provided. For example, unwanted fire signals, which are referenced in the report. Ways of working are clearly going to change for the service, and this will take considerable time to plan for and implement. The authority, under the advice from the Treasurer, our statutory advisor in terms of finance, has committed to using its available reserves in a balanced and proportionate way. And I've made arguments repeatedly to the Treasurer that that's what we should be doing, and you'll see that some of that is reflected in the report today. I would also say that the report highlights remaining future years of budget deficit that will need to be addressed. And I go back to the point that I made to Steve's question earlier. I don't think there's a white horse coming over the hill from the government in terms of the financial settlement, and reserves can only be used once. You don't have to be a mathematician there to work out that once you've used them once, if you've still got a remaining millions pounds worth of budget deficit down the line, you've nowhere else to go and you end up having to cut services further. A cross-party letter has been drafted for the Fire Minister and the Chief Fire Officer and I have been meeting with MPs, as I explained earlier, to explain the future pressures facing the authority. And I'll just finish by saying this. I have huge sympathy and support for the argument that the FBU are making about firefighters' pay at the moment. I was proud that this authority budgeted for a 3% increase in pay last year, and I think we were vindicated in our decision, because I think the offer of 2% to firefighters who have been heroic throughout the pandemic and in recent months was a slap in the face to people who are working really hard, not just for this community but for this country. And I will continue to argue nationally that the pay award that comes back needs to be much higher than the 2%, or maybe even the 3% that this authority has budgeted for. But if it is much higher, and the Treasury, of whom I have made representations to personally as the Chair of the Fire Authority, the Chief Fire Officer has, are not forthcoming with monies to fund an increased pay offer for our firefighters, this authority will have to try and find the money. And there is only one place it will be able to find the money for that, reserves. And so you can see the competing pressure on reserves in terms of trying to make sure that we've got a balanced budget and trying to make sure that our hard-working heroes who work in the fire service get the pay that they deserve is incredibly difficult unless and until this government wakes up and starts giving us the funding that we deserve here in Nottinghamshire. Thank you to the FBU for your questions, and I hope that those answers provide the necessary information. I'm now going to ask the Chief Fire Officer to introduce the substantive report, which is titled in our pack, Futures 25 Efficiency Strategy Update. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose really just to lay some kind of context on it, there's obviously going to be the focus from the authority around the fire engine and the fire station side of this. I feel it incumbent on myself at the moment just to remind everybody the deficit the authority is looking at is over £6 million over the next 3 years in terms of the planning assumptions, the available information we have now. So it'd be very easy just to look at this single report, but unless we find some money from the sources of revenue we do get, the authority is looking at a £6 million gap. And I think that just levels the kind of, it puts us in some sort of context about where the financial situation is. And Becky, as your Treasurer and Head of Finance, has provided a planning assumptions update, and we'll touch on it in the report. February this year, the planning assumptions are around about £2.1 million, and then obviously cost of living inflation. Those planning assumptions were revised to a £3.3 million deficit for next year alone. So again, the pressures on the Fire Authority in terms of the money it has available to provide me as your Chief Fire Officer on what we can spend money on. We also provided a report earlier in the year setting out really I think Councillor Neil, welcome back. You called it a pithy report, and indeed it was. It was to actually set a marker to say that we were going to look at pay budgets and non-pay budgets. And this is the first report building on that to give you some context about what we are looking at. And again, we'll go through the report. What I would go on record as saying as the Chief Fire Officer, these are not the kind of reports the Chief Fire Officer wants to present. They want to present us a picture of positivity, optimism, of leadership of the organisation about what we're here to do for communities. But unfortunately, we have to balance the budget at the same time. And again, there will be some balance. There's 9 recommendations in this report, and I wouldn't want it to be lost on anybody that we're not just talking about firefighters. We are talking about every corner of this organisation, the support staff that have the loyalty and pride just the same as firefighters in the organisation. So it is a very difficult report, and it is something I've wrangled with for many weeks now getting to this point, and certainly the many conversations I've had with the Chair about how do we get to this point. So I accept it's very difficult, and I welcome some staff from the organisation as well. It just shows me the interest that our staff have, and I certainly know from the message I'm getting people that are going to be watching us online in terms of delivering this report. So really just taking us steadily through, Chair. The background section in terms of 1.1, which is page 51 of your pack, talks about since 2010, the real cash terms that the difference that we've made. So 9.6 million is a kind of like the rough figure we've talked about. But when you take into account inflation and other issues, it's obviously going to be significantly more than that in terms of the cuts that this service has successfully made. We talked about in 1.2 about the 2.1 million, and then 1.3 talks about the 3.3 million pounds that I've just referenced. We also said earlier at the start of this financial year as well, we'd seek to make around about 1.6 million pounds of temporary savings. And again, some of those questions from the Fire Brigade Union earlier touches on in-year savings, and there are vacancies. And that was a specific and particular thing that we did to start using a year to smooth in to identify specific substantive savings in future years. And we've managed to actually do that in terms of underspends. What I would touch on as well is, and Becky may want to come in on some of this around the funding, those underspends we believe will likely to have to be used if there's any in-year increase in pay settlements with the lobbying nationally. So we think we've got about £800,000 of underspend, somewhere around that point, but any increase over 2% that comes back that is unfunded by government, not just the employers, is likely to wipe out the underspend that we've created through this year for any increase in salary. But that only deals with the issue in year. It doesn't deal with it in coming years where that is unfunded. So we've still got the issue about any increase above 2% or 3%, let's say, that authority budgeted for last year. 1.5 I'd like to kind of touch on, and again, I know my Fire Brigade Union colleagues have touched on some of that. It was important for me to talk about how good this organisation actually is. Not just what we think it's like to work in this organisation, but the HMI felt it was like when they came to visit this organisation. HMI look at 11 areas in inspection across people, efficiencies and effectiveness, and they rated it as good in all 11 areas. And that is at a time when we have continued to reduce the size of the workforce, and people like myself have asked more of the workforce in terms of productivity and performance. So something to be really proud of there, and I felt it just put it in some context about where the organisation is. And again, I put in the report myself. Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service has lost since 2016 11% of its workforce compared to 1.6% across the England average. And that is a question I can't answer in terms of talking to my Chief Fire Officer colleagues about why that is different. It seems to come down to the funding models are so different with your combined fire authority, a metropolitan, a county council, through a mayoral model or a PFCC. There is many funding models that are different, and that is a matter of debate through the strategic reform of the fire sector. Whether that continues or not, we will have to wait and see when the new fire minister is actually landed and gets settled in post. It also talks in there about the cost of your fire service per head. We're roughly £1 cheaper than the England average of cost of fire. So we're already a cost-effective and cheap model within the city and county of Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. Some of the work we talked about as well, and again about the funding streams, 27, £28 million of our budget comes from council tax precept, and members will be very well aware from your constituent authorities about the restrictions that faces us. We are capped at 2%, effectively levying 1.95, so that any adjustments means you come under the 2%. Without any increase in that cap, either through referendum referenced in the recommendations today, or by government doing a relaxation on the cap. For example, as the chair referenced, some authorities last year were able to levy a £5 flat rate in council tax band D. What does that mean to you as a fire authority if we were allowed to do that? That's an additional £1 million in your base budget if we're allowed to go to a £5 flat rate. That's a significant difference to us because that's sewn into the base budget for years to come. So we'd either need government to relax that or the idea of a referendum locally. And we'll touch on the referendums. I think there's been 2 or 3 referendums, and some of the work I've done with a clerk in recent weeks. Those referendums were not supported by the public in the past. And of course, you'll have to fund that referendum yourselves as well, out of your reserves potentially as well. So in terms of there's a catch-22 situation there about what you may wish to decide on that. And I've tried to talk in there as well as previous budget reductions have been dealt with internally by the service. Yes, we've done lots of collaborations, but they have been more around community effectiveness rather than cost effectiveness. And I think some of the options I've tried to lay down, we've tried to look at proportionality and balance right across the organisation. Moving on to section 2 as we move through the report then. 2.2 talks about the breakdown. I think it's important that it's clear, not only for members, because members are very aware of this, but these are public papers so that the public understand it's my opportunity to give more information in a transparent way to the communities that we are here to serve about how we get the money and how that is spent. So you can clearly see that council tax is by far the single biggest number, government grant at 7.3 million, and then business rates at 8.5 million. And then we have some top-up grants that we get, particularly pension grant, that we go from year to year. What I would sort of say as Chief Officer, and certainly my discussions with Becky as Treasurer, the biggest single thing of assistance we could get is a longer-term funding settlement for the fire service. A 1 year, year-on-year settlement does not give us any kind of like longer-term certainty, and it makes it certainly far more difficult in terms of coming back to members and supporting you in my role about what we can do in terms of longer-term planning. Moving on in terms of the areas of work then, we've talked about in the previous reports, there are 2 main areas really where we're looking for savings, and 2.3 onwards talks about workforce review. And this is led by one of our area managers, Leila Henry, supported virtually really across the organisation. Now this has looked at those people who are not firefighters, but many of them do frontline service delivery tasks, so in prevention and protection, for example, but they are not the ones firefighters on fire stations. So we're looking at the Green Book side of it, and the report says there, this is about 158 staff across the board, but again, some of those are doing prevention and protection, so regulatory enforcement in terms of the team that's upstairs on the Highfield site that we're at today. And that has a total cost that equates to about 15% of the total budget for the authority. So I want to give some reassurances really to members. One of the recommendations talks about we've identified at the moment £250,000 of savings from that already, and that's from phase 1. And the report talks about phase 2, which goes on to fundamental service redesign of those functions and seeking to make some cost savings from there as well. And again, that will be based on our statutory duties and the risk we face. What I would sort of say of that, and I listen to staff fairly regularly as well, is that that is going to have a negative impact on how much we can do or how quickly we can do something. And that clearly has a massive knock-on to our frontline firefighters and staff on what support they will be able to have. So where they want to get something done, it will either take longer or we'll have to make a decision about whether we can do it or not, based on the risk to the service and the authority. But I want to give some reassurances around the balance, and I think it's important as well. The uniform that firefighters wear are not just the people that deliver this fire and rescue service. And it would be wrong of me not to recognise the important role that all staff in this organisation do. So support roles in terms of non-operational service delivery staff and support staff generally. So you will have met somebody coming into reception today. You will have Becky and her team doing finance, people who do HR. So there's some very challenging times ahead about where we cut our cloth accordingly. And it's my hope that over the coming months we'll develop that work so that for the next financial year we'll have some substantive proposals back about how much savings we're able to make from those areas as well. And that piece of work will be getting scoped as of next week. We're now making some adjustments internally about how the team will be resourced to deal with that piece of work. And Becky, in terms of her studious work, has done. We've got some work that will be identified in earmark reserves around transformation fund, and that will help us really kickstart and get some of that work done. So there have identified some numbers of roles there, and we've talked about that there's 29 posts that fall into things like fire protection and prevention. Phase 1 initially looked at review of management posts and in terms of roles, responsibilities and risk, not necessarily needing to do the detail in there, but we tried to make sure we prioritised really about getting the work done, but making sure that there was we could flatten the structure basically in the organisation. And the proposal talks here as well about the 250k in 2.10 of your report, about £250,000 that we'll seek to make. Also for members, in terms of remembering as well, which will be reviewed in December at members' request, the scheme of delegation was amended that the Chief Fire Officer has autonomy to convert, delete, establish and disestablish posts within the establishment, so long as I remain within the overall pay budget. And of course, that will mean then that authority members will receive a report annually about the changes that we've made in the establishment. So you've already made some preparations to give a bit more flexibility to the Chief Fire Officer and the wider team to be able to do that. So phase 1, in terms of reductions, we now need to move on. We've got a lot of people who are very anxious because what does it mean for them? And I hope in the coming weeks we'll be able to provide a lot more clarity to the people that are actually directly affected by this. Because I'm very mindful, we're talking about human beings here, and we need to provide them with clarity as quickly as we possibly can. So moving through that in terms of the workforce review, and again, the Chair made a point about the impact. It is not lost on me, and it's clearly obvious. We will not be able to do as much as we have done in the past. We will not have the resources to do that, and that will be based on risk and your statutory duties as a fire authority and the priorities we have within the CRMP. Moving us on, Chair, if I could, I'll move to 2.15, the fire cover review. We did a piece of work, this isn't kind of overnight, and I've heard all and seen lots of things written about, and FBU questions, and Mark and I will talk, and Steve, I'm sure we'll talk at length about these, about misinformation, misleading, short of information. What you have here basically is a fairly broad executive summary that draws on lots of information, and the underpinning information will be made available that back up some of these decisions. Because we wanted to make sure that we were robust and we're trying to do the right thing as broadly as we could. So we did fire cover review and strategic assessment of risk. So you have a duty to provide an integrated risk management plan as it's labelled in the legislation. We call it within the fire sector a community risk management plan, and it's our commitment to communities about how we're going to create safer communities and those things that we're going to do and communities we're going to target with those services, whether it be prevention, protection and response. So we did a fire cover review. It broadly said in our assessment of risk, generally most of our stations are about in the right place. But again, the report touches on as the city and conurbation and towns and villages begin to expand, it'd be completely wrong and unrealistic to expect that future resources in coming years would always stay in the same place. And that's not the point of a CRMP. The CRMP is to be reviewed regularly to make sure that you are addressing all foreseeable fire and rescue service risk in the right way. Moving on to the crux of fire cover review as well, 2.16 talks about the service currently has established, and this isn't numbers of people, this is established posts that are budgeted for, 431 whole-time posts with a total cost of £24 million as it says in the report, so equating to 53% of the overall budget. And all staff must maintain operational competence in terms of cover, either as part of the ridership or other roles. So some uniform posts work in our training centre or in things like risk and assurance, where they're dealing with risk in the built environment. And another in scope, where it talks about in the report, it talks about those middle managers. So those middle managers are station managers and group managers. who move along to incidents in vehicles, in cars, and add to the command structure as the complexity of the incident protracts. And a lot of these people are obviously station-based. And we're also not talking necessarily here about all the on-call firefighters that we have. So members will be well aware the 30 appliances you currently have at the moment at night, because of the day shift crew models, they're covering Retford and Ashfield currently. At night, 18 of your 30 appliances are retained or on-call fire appliances. So they're not even whole time anyway. And the report does touch upon as well is that since 2010, the service has already seen a reduction of 6 fire appliances coming from predominantly around the city conurbation. So places like Arnold, Carlton, 2 fire appliances from here that used to have 3 when we first opened the site. So you can see the kind of degree of the cuts that we've had, and we've had something like 30% cuts in operational officers, so from myself down to station manager. So the service is well practised, unfortunately, in making quite striking cuts in its service. There are some changes that we have reviewed as well, because I was queried by people about we only seem to be looking at station and group manager. We did do a review of area managers, and we've got 3 substantively at the moment, and a review of their terms and conditions and their collective agreement was already done last year. And there is a paper attached for authority members to consider, because principal officers are your appointment, they are not my appointment. They are your appointment. So there is a recommendation in a paper to make some cost adjustments without affecting, in my view, the operational model around principal officers. And it says in 2.19 we can make an adjustment of about £80,000 of savings in the first 3 years, because you don't appoint your authority appointed fire officers on 100% salary, you appoint them on 90%, and then through performance over the coming years they can achieve 100% salary, subject to the satisfaction of their performance. And then there's a £20,000 saving per year, which we'll cover in more detail on the supporting report. 2.20 talks about what the fire cover review is designed to do, resource optimisation based on strategic assessment of risk. And again, we've used a world-leading body to help us do this, because we know that we are subject to things like close public scrutiny from yourself as members, and the knowledge of our own workforce of why are they doing that, why don't they do this. Our staff know a hell of a lot about what they do, thankfully, and so that creates a lot of questions. So we've used a world-leading organisation to help us do the algorithms and crunch our data. So any data they have used is what we've provided for them, and is based over a 5-year period, which is statistically significant in terms of what we are doing. And it's something that we've done since 2010's fire cover review. So again, over the last 12, 13 years, we've kept a fairly consistent way about how we assess risk in the city and county. Resource modelling in 2.21 talks about, again, just reiterates that and gives you some idea about who they have supported over the years through NHS, EMAS, London Fire Brigade, West Midlands Fire Service. So the 2 largest fire and rescue services in the country have used this organisation, which hopefully gives some reassurance about the credibility of their competence. And equally so, we do have the offer from that company if we want to bring them into member seminars for any scrutiny or otherwise. And equally so, we may even be subject to things like judicial review, and they have experience of being brought in as expert witnesses for things like judicial review. So we believe we've gone, in terms of our own due diligence, to try and get the best support, because these are difficult decisions that you will have to make in the authority. 2.22 talks about what we asked them to do. There was a criteria that we gave them, and we gave them a sliding scale of savings, because obviously the unpredictability of it. And we went beyond the previous planning assumptions of £2 million at the beginning of the area that Becky as the Treasurer provided, because we felt that things were going to get worse. So we went as far as £3 million, which gives us an option about what we can do and where we would take the fire cover from. And again, subject to the costings, subject to government grant or getting a funding cap on preset, we know if we have to go as far or if we have to go further. And again, if we have to go further, we're going to bring ORH back in as the plan, and they'll assist us further about how much in terms of the least worst option. And again, I've been very clear about, in the paper they've talked about best option, and it even talks about a direct lift, because it is a direct lift from their report about best option. I use the expression of least worst option, based on the data we've got and my professional judgment as your Chief Fire Officer. Which brings us on to 2.25 in terms of the extant recommendations that affect fire cover. It is about the second appliance at London Road, second appliance at Stockhill, night cover at West Bridgeford, and the conversion of Ashfield back to a one-on-one, one whole time and one on call. And again, that's created much debate, thankfully. I'm glad to see that it's created a lot of debate, both in communities, the workforce, and online and social media. About, and I get your point in terms of Fire Brigade Unit, about a flawed model. It's a model that's used widely across the country. Not necessarily flawed. It's debatable whether people agree with it or not, and there's varying views about that. But when we take out further resources from the city and then look at response times in the north and the risk, the reason for putting it back in is more risk north of the city than there is south of the city. And again, it's based on the data. So in terms of misinformation and being misleading, we're quite happy and open to have a look at all of the data. 2.26 then talks about, and we've again been very, very clear about it, it will reduce the ridership, so the whole time numbers of posts on fire engines by 44 to 312. And certainly we know, I go back when I was in the service, they were in the 500s when I joined the service. But again, that's in the balance of, we are well in excess and close to 30,000 incidents a year. So the response demand is not there as much. What I would sort of say, incidents have become more complex, a bit more diverse. Society has got different demands on the fire service, and that is something we've had to adapt to as well. What's been replaced, and again, Mark from the Fire Union talked about safe and well visits, business safety checks. The time is largely spent doing business safety checks, so the prevention and protection work, and there will clearly be some tensions about how much we can do and where. And again, we've talked in the report about we will need to review what we can do in the community risk management plan. Excuse me, Chair. We've talked as well in 2.27, and it's contained within the tables, around the impact on response times. We're being very open. This has a negative impact on response times. It would be ludicrous for me to say otherwise. And bear in mind, fire stations are not just positioned because of response times, and they are certainly not just positioned because of the amount of calls they get. We have to balance a number of factors, numbers and types of calls, response times, and the local risk. And it'd be very easy to just pick on one strand to say that's why that fire station needs to be where it is. And equally so, if a fire station does not have a fire engine in it because it's out doing something, we have well-practiced methods in place through our joint fire control about cover moves. And they will need to be reviewed as well about how we provide cover when other areas are denuded of fire cover. But that is something that will have more pressure on us, but it's something we are already well-practiced in. Again, 2.28 on page 56 of your pack, I've talked about your community risk management plan. It seems somewhat bizarre. It takes us about 18 months to develop a community risk management plan. We're about 5 months into this community risk management plan, and we're having to review it based on the finances. Whether that means we need to go back out to the public in terms of consultation about a fundamental change to it, or we can make some adjustments within the commitments, because we're going to start writing the next CRMP early in the new year. So we're going to have to be careful about where we put our resources and whether it's a false economy to try and develop a new one at this time, or make adjustments and accept that we're very open about that and develop the new one from 2025 onwards. And the table one talks about the impacts there in terms of the variations in response times. One of the things that we will do as well that's in the report, we are going to review the response time. At the moment, we have an 8-minute average response time. That can be quite misleading. It's useful from some respects, but it can be quite misleading. If you're an on-call fire station in Misterton, your average response time might be about 15 minutes now anyway, because you're on call and you're in Misterton, and it depends where your call is. Your fastest response time at the moment is around the conurbation, because that's where most of the whole-time resources are, or places like Mansfield or Worksop that have a whole-time cover 24/7. And as I say, what I said earlier, 18 of your fire appliances overnight have a delay built into them because people have to come from their homes to get to the station. So there's around about a 4 or 5 minute delay for people to get even into the station. And we measure our response time based on all incidents at the moment. We believe that's going to be a flawed model to continue, and we're going to have a look at what the best way of doing that response time measure. So, for example, we may change it or propose that it's changed, that the response time to primary fires, and it might be primary fires in domestic homes as opposed to unwanted fire signals, RTCs. But that's a piece of work we're going to have to start to do, subject to support of this report. Table 1 then shows the implementation implications of a £2 million savings. And again, we've talked here specifically around first appliance attendance. So that first appliance get in there so we can get a crew as quickly as possible to scene. They can do a dynamic risk assessment. They can absorb information en route to the incident. And we have methods in place where we receive information around discretionary mobilising through our joint control can begin to send more appliances. And again, back to the Fire Brigades Union's point, not only will it have an impact on 2nd, 3rd and 4th and 5th pump attendants, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, it will have an impact all the way up the chain. And we are not trying to hide that. And I think it's important that I don't want to see that I've got my head in the clouds about these things, because it will have an impact all the way through. And again, we will have to look at predetermined attendances. What does that mean? What is the predetermined attendance? So the numbers of things and types of things we would send to a fire call. We will have to look at predetermined attendances in terms of a review to make sure we get the right people. So I've got less people on a fire engine, for example. Do I need to send more fire engines to that incident type? And that is a conversation we've been having for many months now as a senior leadership team, if that's what we need to do based on the cuts we will have to make. We've tried to include in terms of figure 1 some of the incidents since 2012. And again, these are one strand of information because incidents in an area doesn't mean to say it's your appliances going to it, and it might mean actually there are more incidents over the bridge or in another location. So it depends on the incident type and how many appliances are required based on the commander's needs. Something I use as a fact, and it can be fact checked, I'm sure anyway. Today at our busiest period on a normal day, we'll probably have about 6 of our fire appliances at any one time that will be discharged and deployed to operational incidents on a normal day. You start throwing in spate conditions like we've had in the summer that are likely to get more routine, then it's clear we become very stretched, and over a 2-day period we had nothing left to send anywhere. That's why we build on our mutual assistance, and again, members may not be aware, we now have national operational guidance that's been embedded. We have a joint fire control with Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service and a tri-service control arrangement that includes Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service as well, where we can seamlessly deploy resources across those 3 fire services. And again, we call on South Yorkshire, Lincolnshire where it's required, and they do us as well. So mutual assistance will clearly be called upon more and more in coming years, I'm sure. Moving on to page 57, I've touched on 2.32 where it talks about the proposed reductions in response capability, and it's going to be compounded by the ongoing challenges we have and the resources we have to put into the on-call firefighter element of the workforce. And this is a national challenge, and I know Councillor Drosny has challenged me many times over recent years about what are we doing about these things. I believe there's probably more we could do, and I've been meeting other chief fire officers recently about how they're having some successes around their on-call contingent. But clearly, if we've got less whole-time fire engines, we're going to have to rely on our on-call fire engines more, which means we're going to have to do even more to make sure that they're available to us, which is a national ongoing challenge. And I have written in there in terms of enthusiasm and dedication to communities to deliver 18 fire appliances overnight. So we're going to have to do more in terms of our on-call element. Since its introduction, we've reviewed the day shift crew model, I think twice, really, one in terms of a formal way and one more in a kind of an ongoing way. I think that model, in terms of not just in terms of what we've proposed in these recommendations, the model itself in terms of the hours it covers and the capacity it has, there will be an ask of me in terms of the head of response that we'll have a look at that in terms of the hours it covers and the resources it uses, and then we'll report that back to members as well outside of this report, but in, I suppose, complementary to it. 2.35, we've talked there about your responsibility, where you're making, you've got a statutory responsibility in terms of not only balancing the budget, but making sure that you consult the public where it actually affects fire stations. And again, this has been something through for many years now that you've had to do. I suspect I know what the public is going to say and the staff are going to say and representative bodies are going to say about it. It's going to be quite a negative feedback about what we're going. I can't imagine many people are going to be voting their hands up in their sways for what we're proposing today. So I guess really just a bit of foresight for members, what we'll get back in February is not likely to be supportive of the proposals. But I would reiterate as well, I know Becky will through the Finance and Resources Committee as your treasurer, you will still have a funding gap to solve. 2.36, and again, good prompt from our Fire Brigade Union colleagues. We can't continue to deliver everything we do now in the way we do it without ways of working changing or a review of the demands placed on the staff that we will have left. And that's why I've asked for the Head of Response again, supported by the Head of Prevention Protection and the Area Manager Response, to look at the demands and the working day of the staff that we do have that are predominantly covered by the whole-time workforce. Constantly reported through Councillor Drosny's Community Safety Committee. We report on things like automatic fire alarms or unwanted fire signals, whichever way you want to call it. And of the 9,500 to 10,000 incidents that we go to, around 40%, so 4,500 of those, end up being unwanted fire signals. And in my view, that is something that we need to, on a risk-based process, property by property, look at whether we should be providing an immediate response to those premises or not, or whether we should be making sure that those appliances are ready to go to domestic property fires, road traffic collisions, and those kind of things. And that'll be a piece of work that we'll report back, again, through things like Community Safety Committee, about on a risk-based process. And hopefully that will create some capacity, not only to be ready to respond, but also to make sure that we can do the prevention and protection work that we are statutorily obliged to do. And again, if we can make inroads into that, I believe that will make a significant difference. What I would caveat that as well while we're here, I said earlier that our response time is based on all incidents we mobilise to. So those 4,000 alarms are usually quite close and the mobilisation time is quite quick, which brings our average attendance time down. If we take out those and response times to other incidents are longer, we might see next year, for some reason, our response time that we report to you goes up. So we'll need to make sure, and just make that clear now, we'll have to do the work around that to make sure that we understand and we can demonstrate. It's not because we're failing necessarily in something, it's the way we measure it has now completely changed. And I just wanted to make sure that we're very clear to members about that, because we will get challenged on that. I hope we get challenged on that, because, otherwise what we're here for. If we can reduce that, then hopefully we'll free up and make sure that vehicles are free for things like RTCs, as opposed to going to places where responsible persons and business owners should be maintaining their properties in the way they should be maintaining them. I've specifically put in 2.38 as well, is on the first line, this report does not recommend any reductions in protection measures. This organisation is going through really a revamp of how it approaches fire protection in terms of the upskilling of its wider operational workforce and the regulatory framework that we are statutorily obliged to deliver. And not just because of the Grenfell tragedy, but I think the Grenfell tragedy is a poignant reminder that if we let things decay, this is how bad things can get. So at this moment in time, almost like I'm recommending as a Chief Officer, we ring fence fire protection, and there's no real recommendations here other than the workforce review around prevention, although you can't help but say that will be in scope anyway within prevention. But I'm being very clear at the moment with the team is that fire protection will not be touched at the moment. There is too much to do in terms of the Building Safety Act and the Building Safety Regulator being brought in that makes me feel there's too much risk in that area to actually gamble with at this time. So that's 2.38 on protection, Chair. I guess really kind of moving down, we've talked about government grant and broader issues there. Obviously, the consultation will take us up to Christmas. We hope that we can bring something back either to a member seminar or group leaders very early after the Christmas break about the indication of consultation, to then bring back, hopefully, to Fabrice Fire Authorities a full report from the company that we use to support us. And then obviously that will underpin any report we bring back where we might have to make any substantive changes that are recommended within this report. The report also talks about as well the idea that if we want to do it locally, about a referendum in terms of uplift on the council precept. And again, my view on that is forget whether they've been supported in the past. It's not for me to assume or presume whether members would support it or not. I feel it's my job to present you. You do have an option here to do a referendum, and it's for your role whether to discuss that and either support it or discount it. And then at least we know, at least establish that. But I do believe if we're asked by people like Home Office and the Minister where you could have done a referendum, but you chose not to, well, at least you've considered it in your ways in terms of representing your constituent authorities. There's some financial implications that we've laid out in there and we've kind of talked about, and if there are any questions, Becky can kind of jump in as well. We've talked about in 3.3, because the Chair's talked obviously around the pay dispute, and to add some more context in that, I'm aware that the Fire Brigade Union is about to go to ballot or is balloting shortly in coming weeks. We've met, and I know the Chair's dialed into a national call as I have this week, where the employers have been asked about whether they can find additional funds from their budgets, which may increase the offer to the employee side. My conversation and advice to the Chair and the conversations I've had with the Treasurer, you're already facing £3 million of cuts from your own budgets next year. A 1% increase above the 3%, because this authority has got 3% in its budget, a 1% increase as it talks in there is around about £350,000. So that's just going to compound your already existing £3 million. So unless that is underwritten by government, any additional rise, that is only going to affect the budgets you've already got limited, which means we're going to have to go further and harder in terms of savings from the authority. And again, we do come under some criticism nationally in the fire sector about the amount of reserves that are held sector-wide. This authority is in the bottom quartile for holding of reserves of fire authorities in the English fire and rescue sector. So we're already in a place where you are at the bottom end as a combined fire authority of the number of reserves that you hold. And Becky, in terms of the information she's provided in 3.3, has talked about if we assumed a pay award of 6%, and there's lots of conversation about being on par with the police and all those kind of things. My view might be, or one view discussed this week, is that I'm not sure government would come back and say anything at the minute until they see the outcome of a ballot from the employees and whether that's well supported and there was a good turnout in terms of the emphasis. But as I said to you in previous meetings, the service is now spending a lot of its time in terms of resilience planning in case there is industrial action by the Fire Brigade Union. So there is work we are not now doing because we are now planning for industrial action throughout the latter autumn and into the winter. So we've tried to lay down there with the help from Becky, and thank you, Becky, for your support over many weeks. In 3.5, we've talked about the reserves include 930k to support budget pressures. And again, the Chair was very clear about he's pressed us really hard around our attitude and approach to using reserves. And Becky is very aware over the next 3 years, in a proportionate and balanced way, we will need to use some of those reserves. So hopefully that takes away some of the pressures about we're sitting on a pot of money we could be using. And we can only use it once, as members know. What we have sort of said as well is because we've built up a budget underspend over the year, if the pay rise is higher than what we've already budgeted for as an authority, we can use that in terms of offsetting the in-year increase, but that doesn't deal with some of the following years. So again, that builds in a cost that we'll need to address through further savings. I'm not going to cover the HR implications and things. What I will go is in terms of like the legal implications and touch on some things. Why do we put these kind of things in here? There's been some discussions nationally about the Secretary of State's powers of intervention under Section 22 of the Fire and Rescue Services Act. And this is really about where an authority is failing or is likely to fail. And I do not really know what the threshold of that is. That's an issue in terms of things like locally about, where you're meeting your statutory functions, or where there is a view from the Secretary of State where you're not meeting the Act in terms of fully. And again, these are in as a reminder about the ability to set a balanced budget, what the auditors may feel about that, and your legal duties. And also things like best value in terms of like continuous improvement and those kind of things. So there is clearly pressure on you in terms of like the Fire Authority, but that's just a reminder about where we are. A sad day that we have to talk about these sort of things, but it is incumbent on me to remind you these are the things that the Secretary of State does have the powers under the Fire Rescue Services Act in terms of the powers of intervention. Risk implications, again, these are just a flavour of them. So they are not all of them, obviously, but they are a flavour of things. The one that I hold dearest, really, is the confidence and reputation of this organisation with the communities I am here to serve and have served for 28 years. And it is that I hold most dear in terms of the risk and the very sensitive way we will need to deal with some of these issues. And the workforce in terms of the changes. We will be asking the workforce to make changes yet again. The 12th year of, this is the 12th year that I've been involved in either designing reductions in the service or sitting here now as your Chief Fire Officer trying to explain and talk our way through these things. And again, we've talked about there as well, we'll have to look at what we can do for communities. So the Community Risk Management Plan. And that will be, again, things like prevention. There will be partnerships that we sit on at the moment that we are not likely to be sitting on in another year's time. So we'll have to, based on the risk and value and where we see vulnerable people and communities, about where we put our resources. And finally, really, I guess, just taking you through the recommendations. 10.1 in your pack on page 62, the final page of the report, is note the proposed reduction in support roles and a move to the second phase of the workforce review. And I guess the reason why I say note is because I've took that in terms of the scheme of delegation. You've given me the autonomy to convert, delete, disestablish and establish posts, and my duty is to report to you when I've actually made those changes. 10.2, support a period of public and workforce consultation to save £2 million from the operational establishment. And I know this will probably be for members in terms of most of the talking point and the questions. Note the proposed changes to reduce the demand upon response resources. And I go back to things like it'll be what we do in prevention, unwanted fire signals. And they are huge pieces of work. They will take a lot of energy away from what we're going to be doing other things. But in the long term, I feel if we we can't just reduce the people we've got without reducing the demand on the people at the left. It would just seem unrealistic. Note the review of the service incident attendance time measure. So the 8-minute average we have at the moment. We can always report on what the attendance time as an average has been. We now need to do the work about what is a sensible measure going forward. And again, that will be brought back to the Fire Authority at a later date. Consider options to pursue a referendum to increase council precept above the current cap. One of the recommendations, support review in 10.6 of the CRMP commitments to communities. Endorse the limited use of reserves for financial year 23-24 to support planned service reductions. Agree to receive further reports to future meetings of the Fire Authority. And the final one on 10.9, which I've not touched on, support Chief Fire investigating sustainable longer-term strategic options for the service. And it says in the report about the opportunities that the ongoing journey to devolution has dealt with. Blue light services are not really mentioned. I know in terms of the Police and Crime Commissioner, we've had very brief chats about what devolution might mean or referenced it in other conversations. But it is clear to me that in terms of devolution and what it might mean for infrastructure, education and commercial investment, both in Derby, Derbyshire, Nottingham, Nottinghamshire, it's been fairly moot on the conversations around blue light. So we're going to seek to have a conversation, hopefully with the chair here and the chair of Derbyshire and the Chief Fire Officer about what do they think devolution means, not in terms of like exploring a deal, but what do they think devolution might mean for fire and rescue services across the two cities and the two counties. because I do know that the conversations, it wasn't really a consideration probably till 2028 and beyond. In terms of financial position, my view is that 2028 is too far away to start having that conversation. But also there are also other strategic collaboration ideas and that we could look at, so local authorities, our work in terms of joint location with our police colleagues. So there are other longer term sustainable options that we could have a look at in terms of sustainability of delivering community fire and rescue services. So I've kept going a lot there, Chair. Lots to kind of divulge. Thankfully it's come out of my head as good as I'd expected it to come out of my head. But those are the recommendations, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chief. And just before I bring in colleagues, I think it is incumbent on me to say on behalf of the authority, notwithstanding the debate that will ensue and the view of the recommendations and the content within the report, a thank you to everybody involved with the piece of work that has led to this report, whatever your view about the recommendations, because I think what you have touched on as Chief, Craig, is there have been colleagues in the service who have had to bring forward recommendations who work amongst colleagues in the service who this will have an impact on. And actually, from a human perspective, before we even get into a debate about the recommendations, I recognise as Chair, and I want colleagues who have put the work in terms of this report to know I recognise how difficult that will have been for those individual colleagues concerned, because they work alongside some of the people who are going to be impacted and are equally as passionate about the service of those who no doubt will be vocal throughout the public consultation, if there is a public consultation on this issue. So I'll bring in colleagues from the floor in terms of the discussion. Councillor Neil.
Yeah, Chair, could I just ask for a 5-minute adjournment?
Yeah, I'm happy to grant a 5-minute adjournment. Can I suggest we have a 5-minute adjournment? Do we need to stop the recording, Malcolm, or should we let the recording carry on?
No, stop.
Stop the recording. Can I ask the recording to be stopped for 5 minutes and then we'll rejoin here? She's just taking a call, I think. She can come. She is. She wasn't taking a call. Okay, thank you, everybody, for your forbearance throughout that adjournment. I think next to be brought in was Councillor John O'Lee, but
I'm going to just give way to Roger.
Yeah, so I'll bring in Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be brief, and I'm certainly not going to be political. I want to be technical on my comments and questions. I speak really as a retired chartered building surveyor and a valuer who spent a lifetime in the public sector in councils in Portsmouth, West Ealing and around there, and at Nottinghamshire County Council. And so the portfolio, the property portfolio of the fire service is one that I'm very interested in. And just to say that in my career I did attend many major fires in the UK in work, mainly as the recovery phase. And so I have huge admiration and a little experience for the front line and all firefighters in their job. It's an incredibly important job, which is why I'm frankly against reducing any frontline capacity in the fire service here or anywhere else, and all of the fire service. So that's the background I'm coming from. As I say, being involved in the built environment, I worked at the county council, and in those days I was responsible for this fire authority's property, both Nottingham City and the county. So I think I have a pretty extensive and detailed knowledge of all the property portfolio for this fire authority. And I'm focusing really on that side of things. So the first part of my comments, I understand the difference between capital and revenue. I absolutely get that. I make the point about a review really of the property portfolio. I'm fairly new to this committee, so forgive me if there's already been one, but to my way of thinking and knowing the property portfolio, I'm aware you're vacating Bestwood Lodge Fire HQ, which I would value as quite a significant value there, and you've presumably got a Worksop fire station site, which I think is probably on the market or you're out to tender on. And there are others I haven't got the memory of the detail of Shakespeare Street in Nottingham, which you vacated and went on London Road, etc., etc. What I'm coming around to, I think there's more scope in reviewing a root and branch review of your property portfolio to see where there could be fairly significant changes. You have a lot of small stations which, in my opinion and experience, were pretty much unoccupied, and with energy costs rising and maintenance, and they're getting older in life, I think there should be a property review. And I think that could give you some capital monies, which, okay, you can't spend on revenue, but you could use extra capital to buy more equipment, I believe. So that's my first real point about that. And on the property side, what about sweating the assets? You've got more. What about some cost-benefit analysis? And what about sharing some more buildings with other public sectors, such as the police and other partners that perhaps would be a more better use of the property resource? My second, that's the question. My second point is really a comment. I have to say I'm surprised, and that's probably an understatement, at the proposal on 2.25, the best options and the 4 bullet points there, which part of that says, as I'm surprised at the proposal to reduce 2 appliances within the Nottingham City, given the number of high-rise buildings in the city of Nottingham. And I live at Radcliffe-on-Trent, and I use the Nottingham City facilities regularly, and so I know Nottingham pretty well over the last 40-odd years. You know, I see the high-rise buildings there, I'm aware of Grenfell, etc., and I see the new builds that's going on at the moment, more high-rise in the city of Nottingham. And so I am surprised that we are considering taking out an appliance at London Road and at Stockhill within the city of Nottingham boundary. That just doesn't seem right to me. You know, greater population in the city and the county, more houses going in everywhere. I mean, the demand, God forbid, is getting higher in the potential risk of fires, and yet we're proposing a reduction in staffing and appliances. I don't get that, frankly. There has to be a better way, in my opinion. I think I've made the points I wanted to. I understand you've got to balance the budget. I think you said, Chairman, or the Chief Vice said, yeah, the savings have to kick in from April next year. And so there's a little bit of wiggle room. being fairly new on the committee, I don't understand why I seem to be at the cliff edge now. Weren't some of these issues foreseen some time back? And I seem so like I feel I'm under pressure now to make a decision when 6 or 7 months down the track something's big's going to happen, and I just don't understand why we've not debated this earlier. I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Upton, and I'll bring you in a moment, Councillor Battlemush and Councillor Neal. Thanks, Councillor Upton, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us. A couple of points I'll just pick up on your representations. I think you're quite right to elucidate the fact that capital clearly can't be used for revenue, and the challenge centrally here in the report is for revenue. So
Yep.
I don't think the point you made about small stations addresses the issue around revenue. And
No.
if I follow your argument correctly about some small stations not being used, I think the logical conclusion of that is you'd therefore be shutting stations. And I don't think anybody in this authority wants to see that. I think you concluded by saying that there has to be a better way. But I'm yet to hear one. And you and I know, having worked in authorities, Councillor Upton, that you have to set a legal budget by February. And unless and until the settlement by the government increases in December, the gap endorsed cross-party in this fire authority last year, which was 2 million, now 3 million because of inflation, which is outside of anybody's control, and the increase in fuel prices has got to be addressed. And your representation was most welcome, your experience was most welcome, but I don't think I heard in the representation any alternative suggestions. The other thing I just want to be crystal clear about, I wouldn't want people to be misled, is we're not taking a decision today. We need to be crystal clear about that. The recommendations set out in black and white, because I don't want the public to be misled about this, is seeking, notwithstanding the other 8 recommendations, to go out to public consultation. That, Councillor Upton, is a legal requirement of the fire service because it's a change to the cover within the fire service. So that is a legal requirement put on us by central government in terms of the regulations and legislation, which I know you'll be aware of with your former experience. But thank you very much for the contribution you made, Councillor Upton. Very welcome. Councillor Battlemuch.
Yeah, I'd like to formally move an amendment to defer the decision today for 8 weeks in order to allow further representation from the authority to the new Fire Minister. And also for further discussion in committee on the paper, because I have some reservations about what's in it and some of the representations I've had from firefighters. I'd like to very briefly speak to the argument about why I'd like that amendment, if that's possible, Chair.
Carry on. Your proposal will need a seconder, though, Councillor Battlemuch, but I'm happy for you to speak.
Okay. My argument is I fully understand the financial pressures. I'm a member of Nottingham City Council that's got equally pressing problems, and I know all about having to vote for budgets and vote for cuts that you don't want to do, and it's a very difficult situation that any local elected councillor gets themselves into. However, on this authority, when we potentially are voting to start a consultation on cuts, we're talking about cuts that could lead to loss of life, and that to me is a fundamental difference than, you know, things that happen in councils in terms of some of the provision that we have to cut. I fundamentally believe the paper was written in good faith, and I want to thank the staff and the people that have put a hell of a lot of work into the document, because documents like that don't, you know, write themselves. A lot of work has gone into it. But I am concerned that there's been some challenge to some of the stuff in the document from serving firefighters who must know their industry better than me, and therefore I would like to have a bit more time to get under the skin of some of the things that have been made as representations to me about some of the detail in the report. So I kind of think it's the wrong time to go out on a public consultation. I mean, the Chief said himself, we know what's going to happen if we go out on a public consultation, that there will be quite mass opposition to service cuts from the consultation. And I think before we embark on that, we owe it to ourselves to be absolutely crystal clear about the data that we are asking for a consultation on. Also, I mean, people opposite know this better than me. We've got a new government. The Chancellor said this morning they're in effect a new government. We've got a new fire minister that I don't think, and I know we're trying to write to him, but we've not met him yet. I'd like to see a situation. I think we've got a meeting of the fire authority in a couple of weeks with all the Nottinghamshire MPs. You know, I'd like to invite the fire minister up to that and come and explain to us why our budget should be how it is and why we shouldn't be arguing from every Nottinghamshire MP and every member of this fire authority that the government needs to fill the gap on this situation, so we're not in the invidious position of having to consult on service cuts. And therefore, I think that would be a better situation to allow that extra consultation, allow that extra discussion, go out and seek reparations from the central government, rather than today embarking on a consultation that I think we will know the outcome to before we start it.
Councillor Zadrozny?
Thank you, Chair. I'm torn here. I've been on this authority 13 years and I've never voted for cuts to service. And I think it's interesting the point Councillor Upton made about why are we at this cliff edge, because it's been every year, certainly for the last 12 years, where, and Craig mentioned it, where we've had to take tough decisions year after year after year. The cliff edge came a long time ago. For me, I agree with everything Steve said, bar postponing making the decision today. And I'll tell you for why. Because I think potentially we could approve this recommendation but not implement it, so that we do call the Fire Minister to that meeting and say, this is the very real problem we have if you don't fund us properly, or if you don't give us the flexibility on council tax rising. We've approved this to go to public consultation if we don't hear something from you. So I think we might be better tooled up going to that meeting if we make this recommendation with the slight amendment that you don't implement the public consultation part of it until we've digested the statements about national insurance cuts today or reversal of the increase, until we've spoke to the Fire Minister, until we've made those representations. Because ultimately the very tough decision is that we will have to do this if the government don't do something. And I agree entirely with what Councillor Battlemuch has said, but I just think this is a stronger bow in our fight if we say we've got this ready to go. This is the real danger. This is what will have to happen. There's no delaying it or anything. We've got to set a budget in April. So come up with the goods, or we have to go to public consultation. And I mean, again, to Councillor Upson's point, we have to have that period of public consultation if we do it. It has to be fed back and digested. I guess we all know what the outcome of that will be, what people feel. But it gives the authority that flexibility to see what comes back from the government, whether they're true to the word or not, and then before 8 weeks away, have your ability to go to the public if it doesn't look like we're doesn't look like we're getting anywhere with the government. Because of course, as your point was, Chair, as well, that it's not a decision; it's a decision for us to consult. And I just think that gives us slightly more flexibility. And I assume you've done this a long time. You're hearing what we're saying. That if we approved it, it wouldn't. We're saying we're giving you the approval to do it, but don't do it until all of the points Steve's made has been tried. We've gone to the Fire Minister. We've sat with our members of Parliament. With the new chair of the Fire Committee at the LGA is a close friend of mine. We should get him down. Up, actually, he's from Devon. But, we should try every opportunity, but still have this to say, this is what's coming next if you don't help. Because I think that's a stronger tool for us to fight with. Not that I really want to put my hand up for it, but I think that's the best play we've got with government.
Thank you, Councillor Zadrozny. Councillor Lee?
Thank you. Completely agree. It's like you've seen our notes.
I haven't.
The public consultation, from Chief Fire Officer's words, is pointless. He openly admitted that it wasn't going to be supported by the public, wasn't going to be supported by his own team. My question is, how much are we going to waste doing the consultation? More money wasted, more money being wasted for something that we know what's going to be the outcome. It's like asking a child if they want Christmas or not, or we know what the answer is going to be. We're not going to spend 50, 60 grand doing a consultation about it. It's yet again wasted money. And I don't want to attack politically, so I'm going to bring it back a little bit. We do support the waiting. We do support going to government and speaking to government and asking them to look at this. But let's be honest, is even if we don't get the answer that we want, we have got other options, and one of the options were mentioned by the union that we can go into reserves. And I get what you're saying, Chairman, we can only spend reserves once, but if we're not going to spend them, then what's the point of having them?
It gives us time.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Bit of a dancing conversion, because the argument I've heard from your own group in the last few years' budgets is that we shouldn't be using reserves to balance the budgets. That's a new thing to me, that you've now said.
I was on the committee then, Chairman.
No,
So.
but you're a member of your group, Councillor Lee, and there's a thing called collective responsibility, and going out to public consultation is a legal requirement. Your party's in government at the moment, so if you don't agree with that, you need to make that representation back to your own government. We've got to go out to consultation on a change to fire cover.
Unless you're not going to make them changes, then you don't have to go to consultation. If you're not going to make the change, then you don't need to consultate about the changes.
Let me finish, Councillor Lee, because I think you made a representation, so I'm trying to respond actually to what you said. I think none of us disagree, because you were here for the vote for last year. There's a £2-point-something million gap in the budget. That's got to be found by February. So unless there's an alternative option on the table about, which I'm yet to hear, about how we close that gap, we have got to go out to consultation in some way, shape or form, because we haven't got the level of reserves to cover the financial gap over the medium term financial plan. So, we can all stand here in this meeting and make a point that we think sounds good, for political expediency in a meeting, and we're all very, very passionate about the service. Me just as much as you, Councillor Lee. But the reality is that there is a challenge that sits here before us, and we are discharged collectively, whatever our political flavour or none, with making sure that the show is kept on the road. And there is a target coming down the line in February where we have to set a balanced budget. And our treasurer, who we employ to give us professional financial advice, is telling us, and the Commissioner will be aware of this in her own world, that there is a gap in front of us and that we've got to deal with it. And professionally, we've been given a route forward that we're going to consult the public on. We're not taking a decision at this stage. And let me just say for the record, because there's been a lot said in the last week, these decisions are evidence and data driven. I will repeat, evidence and data driven. And for my part, I will say as the Chair, I have made no representations throughout that process about which station should be protected, which constituency should be protected, which area should be protected, or which watch should be protected. So those who have made those allegations in the public, and they know who they are in this room about me this week, should retract them, because it does nothing to the debate for members of the public. The presentation that we've had today is from our Chief Fire Officer, who is discharged with giving us professional advice. What's being suggested today is that we go out to public consultation and that we then come together again, collectively as a fire authority in February, and make a decision. And I have great sympathy with what Councillor Battlemuch has said about needing to have further conversations, representations to the Minister. He's quite right, there's a new administration. There's a financial announcement that's been made in the House of Parliament today. I will just politely say, the Chief and I have spent the last few months collectively going round every single member of Parliament. The Chief and I have actually got MPs into a position where collectively they're saying they're happy to make joint representations to the government. So having further meetings with the MPs I don't think is going to change anything. We've got them into a position where they are willing to make the argument. If we delay by 8 weeks and then we have a 12-week consultation which is being suggested, the conclusion of that consultation is going to run up to the legal requirement of setting a budget at the end of February. Then we've got a very real problem that if we don't take some of those tough decisions, what do we do to resolve the issue? And 8 weeks, I mean, we could all say, couldn't we, 6 weeks extension to the before we consult. We're not going to get a new settlement from the government until, my guess, on past experience, the last week in December. So even if we delay a consultation and make an argument to the new government minister, the government minister does not have the executive authority to change the formula in the settlement, even if they give us warm words. Where I agree with the sentiment that's being made, I think, Councillor Battlemuch, by both you and Councillor Zadrozny, is there maybe is something in the authority agreeing the recommendations today, and then organisationally the service not pressing the button on the consultation until a week or 2 or 3 weeks' time, when we have then been able to make representations directly to the new incoming minister who's only just put their feet under the desk and have the opportunity to, and that would be a conversation I would have to pick up with the Chief Fire Officer. I don't think we necessarily need an amendment to the recommendations for that, but I have heard what has been said loud and clear. I think either way, this debate does need to be in the public. I'm not sure that the citizens of Nottingham and Nottinghamshire realise the significance of the pressure facing the service. And my appeal, as your chairman, who feels just as passionately about any of these other issues as anybody else in the room, whatever your party politics or none, today, is that we are simply going out to the public to gain their view and colleagues internally's view about the financial challenge that we make. And I would be quite happy to say, if we agreed the recommendations today to the Chief, that we then find an appropriate date at which we press the button on that public consultation. Ordinarily, we would start the consultation, I think, a week after this meeting. But I think we can find a grace period for there to be further consultations for, as you said, Councillor Battlemuch, representations to be made directly to the Minister about the challenge, the financial challenge, the factual financial challenge that's made. I'm happy to appeal to go and meet with the Chief Fire Officer, with the Minister. Commissioner Henry's been helpful previously in making arguments through to civil servants in the department, and I know the trade union will want to. But I don't think there are any easy solutions to this question, and I haven't heard an alternative to the professional, evidence-led proposal that has been presented to us by the Chief Fire Officer. This is not a political stitch-up. This is not a decision made by Councillor Michael Payne as Chair of the Fire Authority. Whatever people want to levy at me, this is an evidence-led, data-driven decision that we're simply seeking members of the public's view on. Anybody else like to contribute to the discussion and debate? Councillor Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think the fact we're at this meeting now, and it takes somebody to call for an adjournment of it for 8 weeks, knowing the paper's been out there, the fact it's been out there, and we haven't even started debating it really effectively. Listened to the Chief Officer, of course, which is fantastic, and you've heard from the FBU, and what's out there in the press, and suddenly to pause it now, I think, obviously I welcome the fact it should be paused, because I don't think we should be in here in the first place, but the fact that we've put this out there in the press, where I've had fire officers, firefighters contact me really worried, and the angst that's caused, especially in the West Bridgend area, in the London area, and I'm sure in other areas such as around Stockhill, we haven't contacted me for a very obvious reason, not the local member. I'm sure they have their own local representatives. Is the fact that it's a shame we've got to this position now where that's all gone up there, and suddenly, after hearing the debate, you call an amendment for 5 minutes, takes about 20, and come back and come back with an amendment. I think it's good that you've seen the way the debate's going, and the fact that that you need to do this now. But the fact we've got to this point now is where we've got to this meeting to have this discussion, and suddenly realised during it, when we've not even fully debated it, that it's wrong. Like I say, I think it's a shame that this wasn't looked at earlier, and you called for this to be pulled before we even got here. The fact that you want to pause for 8 weeks, I'm not willing to support that we agree recommendations and then pause for 8 weeks to go to the Prime Minister. That's not acceptable, because the fact about speaking to the Prime Minister, I made this point in the last full council of this Fire Authority, Finance, in group leaders meetings and the member seminar, that effectively we should be writing to the Minister, because, I don't like putting tax up. One of the reasons I'm party out, I don't mind saying that, but I actually said we should have the option from the government to do the £5 levy, which I know doesn't fall the whole 2 million, but we should have the option. Then, as members here, we have the full debate and we go forward with that. That's another option out there. The fact that only one option is really put on the papers out there, which there were more options, it's disappointing. So I actually welcome the change of direction that we're at the point where we want to make that. The fact the letter's drafted, obviously heard about that just now, cross-party one, so glad to, after I've seen the draft, obviously first I've heard about it this morning right now, is that's great to go out there. More than happy to make it cross-party, to ask the Prime Minister for more support and to give us that option, because I actually feel that members of the public would actually prefer to pay a small increase, which £5 I think works out about 0.5% of the total council tax bill to protect our fire service, because we know how valued fire service on the community. But we shouldn't have got to this stage right now where suddenly realise this halfway through a meeting, and we've been here 2 hours and suddenly now deciding upon that. And like I say, that firefighters coming on their days off, no doubt to be here, and the angst that's caused. So in terms of the amendment offer, we're more than happy to pause for 8 weeks for another meeting, by the fact that this cross-party letter go out and that we try to arrange that meeting. I'm happy to come down to London, go anywhere to speak to the Prime Minister with you, Chairman, and have that united front to say that we want to have that extra support and make the case. That I've got no problem with that whatsoever, but I can't go recommend, because of that worry out there in the community of that we support recommendations here today, where potentially that could be paused in 8 weeks' time. I just don't think that's appropriate, because you're potentially going to create more worry, more angst out there to our firefighters and the community in general, when hopefully we can find a way to pause anything going on. So Well, it's a place where I go, thank you. I know it's tough that the report's coming before, so thank you very much, and to the people who put together this report. I know it's tough. I've got more comments on the report itself, but I'm not going to make that at the moment because we're going to be going with this amendment put forward by Councillor Buttermarsh, because there's no point having a debate if we're not going to debate it and adjourn it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wheeler. The thing about council tax is not new. Representations were made last year by me directly to your government, the Conservative government, about allowing £5 increase for Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service, and your government and your ministers ignored those calls. And they weren't just representations made by me, there were representations made by the National Fire Chiefs Council, which were reported to this meeting that you were sat in, Councillor Wheeler. There were representations also made by the Local Government Association, cross-party, that you sat in, Councillor Wheeler. And for you to say to people that you didn't know anything about the cross-party letter to be sent on behalf of MPs is disingenuous, and the record needs setting straight, because I have repeatedly announced in chairs' announcements in previous meetings that cross-party representations through MPs will be made, and you sat in the Chief Fire Officer's office with me a few weeks ago in a group leaders meeting where I reported back about that issue. So let's just make sure, if we're having the debate in here, that it's a debate based on factual information, not trying to give a not correct impression of what's happened or what has been said. Your government could have allowed this service, this authority last year, to levy the £5 flat council tax increase, and it chose not to. I don't know what representations you made about that, but I did make representations through several quarters, so I don't need to make a point in today's meeting about that, because my conscience is clear. I know the representations I've made about it. You'll have to speak for yourself about whether you made those recommendations.
Please, Mr. Chair, that's okay. The point I made about cross-party was cross-party between ourselves, not MPs. So if that
includes the Fire Authority, doesn't it? That's the point I made.
Well, absolutely. It's not about MPs, because obviously we've not met the MPs yet. That's similar in September. The point I made, as I made clear in meetings and with yourself and with Chief Foresters, is a cross-party between ourselves on here and the Fire Authority, because yes, MPs can make their own representation. That's what they're there for. But as a united authority, and in terms of made representations, I have drafted a letter ready to go. The reason I haven't sent that is because I wanted it to be cross-party between yourself and Councillor Josney, because I thought actually cross-party of the three parties in here would actually have more impact than just doing a simple letter from myself as the Conservative leader to the Minister, because the whole point is, to me, there shouldn't be, I don't want to play politics here, the Fire Authority shouldn't be a political arena. But that's the point I was making, not about joint MPs, just for the record straight.
Your cross-party approach is welcome, Councillor Wheeler, and a change from your representations in the press earlier this week. Councillor Neil.
So you picked up on a number of points, but I do want to, before I left the Fire Authority in end of May this year, I was fully aware of and engaged with the leadership group from all parties about discussion of the cross-party stuff, and that the group, the authority had taken a cross-party approach on this. That the previous leader of your group didn't brief you that was what had happened seems a bit strange to me, because there were regular conversations that I was party to and other members were party to, and led on the moving forward. The council tax thing, again, I'm a bit. Your own group had agreed the position on asking for the £5 council tax last year. That was part of the negotiations that we had in terms of agreement, the consensus agreement that we got on the budget, which also included the 2.1 million deficit that we are now talking about, and that it was always going to come back at a later stage, that there was going to need to be review. Now, it's my understanding, because I'd left the Fire Authority by this point, but in the July meeting we decided to commission the report to look at a needs-based analysis on this. So that's what's here. And I'm getting confused by some of the comments that are being made here, in that we are not making a decision that this is the process to go. We are being asked to consult on it. To consult the public and the workforce. Now, I hear what the FPU have said around this, and I am concerned about some of the issues, and I don't have a huge amount of enthusiasm for these proposals here. But we are legally required, and as good practice, as members around this table should know, is to go out and seek what the public feel about it, and to get, detailed representations from the FPU around this, from the workforce, from communities that are going to be directly or indirectly affected by us as individual councillors who have serious reservations about here. now I'm here, I'm a replacement, and at some point there is going to be a budget proposal coming forward where we're going to have to consider the two getting closer to 3 and 6 million gap over the next few years. So there are going to be some tough decisions. Now, we've always tried to stay away from too much party politics, but we seem to be dipping into that a little bit here. So, I will make this, very clear from my side. I think the support for it is the government have got to put the money up on this. They've been avoiding it for years. We've been making significant cuts across the last 10 years. There are gaps beginning to appear in the service, and if we are rightly concerned as a group of individuals about the risk to individuals and to communities posed by a failing blue light service, failing in terms of underfunded, not because they're not doing a good job, then we all have to be jointly arguing for that. A lot of the things that were mentioned previously, Roger, and I appreciate your contribution to this, but the sweating of assets, the best use of sites, the disposal of sites, getting the best value for them, that's been forefront of the budget process for the years that I was on the Fire Authority. Bestwood Lodge is a really good example of that, and investment in the joint headquarters, best use of the resources and assets. But it doesn't take away. We're losing money, hand over fist. We need some serious some consideration, and we do need to be lobbying the government on this. But back to the point, which is, I'm going to vote for this because I think we have to go out to public consultation, despite all of my reservations about what's being proposed. But we're going to need it, and we are legally required to do it. And also, if we're going to make representations, it will give us ammunition to say this is not what our communities want.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. Councillor John Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm to support the recommendation as well, and I'm supporting it. I mean, I didn't like it when I first saw it, but it's quite clear we're going out to consultation. The reason we're here is because we've had nearly 14 years of this lot. The Tory government, which has absolutely brought this country to its knees. Yesterday, and I said this in County Council yesterday, we spent £8.5 billion in interest payments. You imagine that on your car when it's a few quid and you're paying interest payments on that. That's what we spent yesterday. It's going to go up because of the decisions today, and it puts us in a very difficult situation. And at some point in the future, I can see where we're heading. We're heading where the lifeboat service will be going out and getting rowing boats out to, and which is subscribed, isn't it? No government support there. The fire service will be similar, where they'll be going out on those. We've got you lads and women will know, them things are pumped and pushed along a road or ran along with horses. We're going backwards. This is giving us a chance to ask people how they feel, and then bring, hopefully, some persuasion from over the other side here that can bring the Prime Minister and other people to this table and explain how we got here and how we're going to move forward, because it's not sustainable now. It's not sustainable on a nation to give 8.5 billion away in interest, and you've seen nothing today but help for the richer people. The people out there are risking their lives on a daily basis and are being shafted by this government, and we need to be absolutely strong words and make sure that the people out there know where the real blame belongs, and that blame belongs with this last 14 years without a doubt. And you could put all the things in of COVID, Ukraine, and all the rest of the different things. But out of that, you think 2 million out of that 8.5 billion we paid, was it Wednesday or Thursday, in interest payment, and will be repeated in 28 days' time, which will then be 30 billion. And it will be repeated after that when it will be over 30 billion. Chairman, I move that you take the vote.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Rain, I think you were just going to take what you had indicated. I will come to you, Commissioner.
Yeah, I mean, why I say might be unpopular with a number of people. I mean, in terms of party politics, first thing I'd say is that I see myself here as I'm a representative of a political party, but it's more important I'm here to represent people in the city of Nottingham, and specifically Baseford and wider Nottingham community. And I have some problems and questions about this, to be honest, as you're aware, Chair. First of all, in terms of the appliances, one's coming out of Stockhill, which is in my council ward. I'm not trying to be parochial here. It also covers the whole of the north of Nottingham. And regardless of whatever impact is on me politically, my responsibility is for any ramifications for safety for residents in the city. That's why I think I'm sat here. Similarly, London Road is south of the city, as has been pointed out. We've got new developments, etc. There's a lot of call. I'm very concerned about that. Some of the figures concern me. I think our friends in the FBU were commenting on 229 in terms of average attendance times. It doesn't mention a second or third appliance. There's information missing here that I'm not particularly happy with. I've not heard from the representatives of the workforce. I respect what the Chief said, obviously, but there's things in here I'm just not particularly sure about, and I think when it comes to public safety, that is a problem, because we're making decisions here that have ramifications for people's lives, and that makes it extremely difficult. In terms of, where we're going with this, I mean, it's not good. I mean, I don't really hold out any hope for representations of government. I think we should make them, because when we look at how this is funded, I've said it before in this chamber, I don't think these services should be funded out of council tax. I represent people who are just about managing. A lot of us do. And £5 may not seem a lot, but people are getting milked. What's happening here, similarly with the pay, is we're budgeting for 3% pay rise when our workforce, are subject to inflation of, 10 or 12%. I mean, we should be making representations for it to be properly funded, not coming out of money here, because otherwise we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're going to see service cuts. So I'm very concerned that we're talking about frontline service cuts. I don't have all the facts. I know it doesn't make me popular with some of my friends. I'm sat on this side, but I can't support that at the moment. I've got to support what Councillor Balmuch is saying. I need to hear more from the workforce, and I need to be assured before we go ahead with this what the ramifications are, and at the moment I'm not. So I'm sorry, Chair, I can't support it on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Rain.
Chair, point of order. Sorry.
There's an amendment. I'm going to take the amendment. Commissioner Henry, I'm aware of procedure, but Commissioner Henry's indicated. So I'm going to take Commissioner Henry's representations to the authority.
Yeah.
I'm then going to ask Councillor Battlemuch to come up with a form of wording for his amendment, because we can't be having amendments based on design by committee. So if we're going to have an amendment, we have wording for the amendment. And I'm going to ask if there's a seconder for the amendment. I'm going to allow the Chief to respond, because a number of points have been made and he has a right to respond. We'll then take the vote on the amendment, and then we'll move, because there's been a request by Councillor Clark as a member to have the substantive vote. We'll then move to the substantive vote, pending on where we end up with the recommendation. Commissioner Henry.
Thank you. I'd like to make 4 points, please. And the first one is trust. I'm here today to represent the public. And having the public trust the fire service is so important. I want our public to be safe and to feel safe. And I'm really worried about some of the conversations I've heard here today. The second one is team. These amazing people behind us, I don't think we've heard enough from. I'm not happy that I have enough information here and understand enough to go to public consultation. And I just wanted to ask, how long legally does that public consultation have to be? What is the timeline timeline? So that's a question. And my next T is together. I noticed from Her Majesty's Inspectorate's report, they talked about one of the areas for improvement was collaboration. And I want to really make sure that we are collaborating as much as we can. I know there's a meeting, I think it's the 28th of October, the Collaboration Delivery Board at Joint HQ with Candida, Lorraine and Damien. But is there any more we can do? Can I do anything to help as Police and Crime Commissioner? So rather than making frontline cuts, we work collaboratively on some of the back office or whatever we can do to work together to save costs. I think that collaboration, that togetherness, really needs to be explored. And finally, my final T is tomorrow. There's so much up in the air at the moment. We've got devolution, where in 2024 potentially, fire and rescue service, could be coming under the combined mayor. It could be coming under the Police and Crime Commissioner. We don't know what's happening. We have reserves at the moment. Did we ought to be cutting frontline services when I can't hand on heart say I don't trust. I'm not completely sure that all the other things haven't been explored. So trust, team, together and tomorrow are my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Henry. I'm going to let the Chief come back on some of the questions that have been asked and maybe address some of the points that have been raised about the proposals, the doubts or questions that people have got, or the comments back. And he'll want to say some bits, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Battlemuch.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose, members, as I said at the start, it's a difficult paper that's in front of you. We've obviously had member seminars over the recent months. We've had group leaders where these reports in more detail have been provided and opportunities have been there to debate. Over the last year in particular and beyond, but years before, there's been every quarter a capital monitoring report that's come, and we're well aware of the financial position and the direction of travel of that. So there's lots of information, not just this report. And as I said earlier as well, all the underpinning data that's involved in this that some members have actually seen anyway as part of the group leaders process. And that the intention was that we would then share that as this became more open in terms of the discussion. So hopefully we can fill some of those gaps. I'd welcome your engagement with the workforce. They would welcome it from the workforce. To know that actually authority members are representing the interests of communities through them as their public servants. They would absolutely welcome that. And as their chief fire officer, I'm never scared about who talks to what, because I think the more people you talk to, the richer your decisions are. Councillor Upton spoke about sweating assets, capital reviews, capital programmes. We are in the middle of a capital programme review. The estate, we do have parts of the estate, if you point out, Bestwood Lodge, the former Worksop Fire Station. We do own a property in Clifton, and we're trying to rationalise already. So that is already underway. And how we use that capital receipt in terms of the legislation about flexible use of capital or to service the authority's debt, whichever way is most prudent to do that. That is already underway, which is overseen by Councillor Clark as your chair of the Finance and Resources Committee, where all parties are represented. So we believe that bit is addressed anyway. Collaboration over the estate, there is always offers out there. The reality is, though, very few people want to sit on a fire station because of what we can offer them, or the things like agile working and all those kind of things now as well. So there are less people who want to do it. Some are community groups. Community groups really want our property, but of course they don't have the funds to provide us to provide it. So we have a couple of places, particularly Mansfield Station. We have Jigsaw there at the minute, and I've had actually a letter this week from another a women's aid group who have been put in touch with us through the Chief Executives Forum about whether they can use it. But again, it's a charity-based organisation that won't have the funds to help us with our heating and lighting bills. But just to give you the reassurance, we are looking at that. Some of the things obviously we've done around the timelines. Council, you talked about timelines, I think, around the consultation. Code of guidance is 12 weeks predominantly. You can be flexible about that. It doesn't have to be as long as that. Our view has always been is when you're doing something so fundamental as taking a fire rating from the public, you should give the public as long a period as possible to make sure that they have their views. And things like where you're having Christmas or summer holidays, you should lengthen it or shorten it in accordance about the year. So we've tended not to like to do them during the summer holidays because obviously people are having holidays and Christmas breaks. Of course, if we delay it, it goes right across the Christmas period, and then the ability to get you back in members' seminars. But 12 weeks, basically, Commissioner. The paper talks about collaboration already. Hopefully, Commissioner, that gives you some reassurance. We've, sent myself from whether it be devolution or joint headquarters collaboration or more collaboration with the health sector or local authorities. That's already what's included within this paper. What I would just say, and Becky's here in terms of, if I get something wrong, please tell me, no, you're wrong, Becky. Around the reserves, we've articulated in the paper your available usable reserves. And by Becky as your treasurer about the advice and prudence. Yes, of course, we can use far more reserves. But the question I would put back as your chief officer, am I going to recruit to a full establishment in this organisation based on the use of reserves? It wouldn't be prudent, in my view, at the moment to do so. And again, Becky may correct me, but you can't establish your organisation based on the money you might have in one year. And my real fear is if the financial situation does not improve in those 12 months, and I hope it does. I hope people are listening, and I really, truly hope it does as a citizen of this country, never mind your Chief Fire Officer. If it does not improve and we establish, or you direct me to establish the authority to a position where all firefighter posts are filled, my fear is that in 2024 I'll be making firefighters redundant. And that is not a position I think any of you would want to be in. And that would certainly cause us many industrial relations issues. And again, I think we need to think about the confidence of the public. So yes, there are more reserves, and I'm sure out of this meeting we'll let the weekend's dust settle, and then we'll have to come back together with the chair and other members about what kind of way forward is, depending on how you vote today. So lots of things there. In terms of MPs' letters and consultation, the idea was that consultation would start as soon as possible after a decision today if it was supported, and then run to 12 weeks, which takes us bang up to Christmas. And again, if we delay it by 2 weeks, 8 weeks or otherwise, that takes us well into January and potentially February, where the Finance and Resources Committee will have to sit about what you want to levy on council precept and how you wish to balance your budget. So I suspect all these things are possible to do, I suspect, when we're able to sit down in the cold light today and look at them. But it will increase the pressure on you, and using reserves is just pushing the can down the road unless we deal with the £6 million gap. And what I would sort of say, £6 million gap using reserves wipes out your reserves completely. And £6 million, put it in some context, if you didn't want to do your frontline service as firefighters, pretty much wipes out everybody in support services, not one person in support services. And that's the scale of the issue that we kind of see. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's a problem. But hopefully that deals with it. And I've got a lot more notes here, and I'm sure members will want some feedback and contact after today as well, Chair. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief, for your thorough response. Councillor Battlemuch, your amendment, please.
Yeah, I've written it out, and hopefully I'll say it slowly and I'll pass it to you, Chair, as well. The amendment is that a vote on the Futures 2025 paper be deferred for up to 8 weeks to allow for 1. Further discussion in committee, 2. More information and representations from the workforce, including their recognised trade unions, 3. For a cross-party approach to the new Fire Minister and to invite him to a special meeting of the authority.
Thank you, Councillor Battlemuch. And in essence, therefore, then deleting the remaining recommendations, substantive recommendations, which are on page 49. Thank you. Page 49 and page 57 in our pack. Is there a formal seconder for Councillor Battlemuch's proposed amendment? Councillor Rain?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, I'm not going to prolong the debate any further. I'm going to move to a vote. I am going to say, because I am the chair of your authority, Councillor Battlemuch has made his argument. I would politely ask colleagues to be mindful in the room of the point that the Chief Fire Officer has made for us, that if we do delay by the 8 weeks, and I take Councillor Battlemuch's words, as he said, up to 8 weeks, we run very, very close to budget setting in February, and we will have a 2 million, now 3.3 million gap that we then don't have time to plan for in terms of savings when we come to the budget. And there is a legal requirement on us as a fire authority to make sure that we are meeting that gap. And I'm asking you, because I'm discharged with that responsibility as the chairman of the fire authority, to consider that when you're casting your vote on the amendment that Councillor Battlemuch has proposed. So the amendment is, as was read out by Councillor Battlemuch. I'm not going to repeat it, but it would effectively delete all of the recommendations on page 49 and page 57 where they're, 62, where they're repeated in the pack. All those in favour of Councillor Battlemuch?
Can I just ask, the recommendation 10.9 is really important to support the Chief Fire Officer investigating a sustainable long-term strategic option for the service.
Yeah, I accept your point, Commissioner Henry, but the amendment's been made. There's now going to be a vote. All those in favour of the amendment as presented by Councillor Battlemuch? I'm going to allow the clerk a moment to record.
Chairman's casting vote.
Okay. All those against? Any abstentions? Can the clerk read out the vote?
There were 9 for the amendment and 9 against the amendment. That means the chair now has a casting vote.
I'm going to cast my vote in accordance with the same way that I cast my vote in the substantive vote. So I vote against. So that amendment falls. And I'm now going to move to the substantive vote. Thank you, Councillor Battlemuch, and thank you, Councillor Owen, for the way in which you put your amendment and the way in which that debate was conducted. Very much appreciated. So I'm going to move the, unless anybody has any other points they want to make, I'm going to move, because I think we've had a really helpful, constructive debate today, which has been conducted in a reasonable manner, for which I'm very grateful as the Chair. I'm now going to move the substantive recommendations. Recommendation 5 on the bullet points will effectively become, because I haven't heard an argument for this, that it's recommended that members agree not to pursue a referendum to increase council tax precept above the current cap. In essence, we would be pursuing a referendum on council tax above the government's required cap, which would cost us in the order of 300,000. I haven't heard anybody arguing that we should be spending money on a referendum, which, if you look at the information provided by the House of Commons Library, I don't think one of them has been successful around the country. So that recommendation will become, instead of consider the option, it will become agree not to pursue a referendum to increase council precept above the current cap. And the final point I will just reiterate, not for people in the room, but for members of the public who may be watching this, there are a number of recommendations here. The debate today has largely centred on one of the recommendations. The one that it does centre on, around supporting a period of public and workforce consultation to save £2 million from the operational establishment. I just want to reiterate the point for the public. The vote today is about seeking a public consultation. It is not about making a decision to remove services from the front line, because I think Commissioner Henry used the word trust. Trust is really important, isn't it, if you're an elected representative? And I don't want there to be a message that leaves this meeting, whatever the vote, that members of the public think that frontline services are being removed. They're not, if the vote is in favour of the consultation today. There will be a 12-week public consultation, and then we will have to come together and find a way forward. So,
sorry, can I just ask whether we can take 10.9 separately? I think everyone's in agreement.
I'm not going to take recommendations separately, Councillor Wheeler. I think we've had a really, really helpful debate. We've got a piece of professional advice here being given to us by the Chief Fire Officer, and I think we need to now move the vote as is laid out on the paper. So I will move the recommendations. Is somebody happy to second? They're seconded by Councillor John Clark. All those in favour of the recommendations? All those against the recommendations? Any abstentions? Could you please read out the vote, Clark?
Yeah, so for were 9, against were 8, with 1 abstention. So,
Thank you very much, Clark. So the recommendations are carried as laid out. Thank you very much to colleagues from the FBU who asked questions today and turned up, and the way in which you've engaged in the debate. Thank you to colleagues around the room for the way in which the debate was conducted, and specifically to Councillor Battlemuch and Councillor Rain for the way in which they proposed their amendment. I'm very, very grateful, and I will reiterate, I think, what others around the room have said. Thank you to the Chief Fire Officer, to Becky and other colleagues in pulling together what has been clearly quite a difficult report for everybody in terms of the decision. I'm now, if people are happy, going to carry on with the remainder of the agenda, which hopefully should be a relatively straightforward series of reports. So the next item on our agenda is the annual report of Information Governance 2021-22. And I think the Chief Fire Officer is going to introduce this. It's on page 13 to 18 of our pack.
I think members will be quite welcome. Mick, as your Assistant Chief Fire Officer, is going to dance us through some of these. But given the debate we've had and the lower level of kind of importance maybe of some of these things, we'll keep it very brief because some of these are for noting. So, Mick, if I could ask you to take through, but if we keep it as brief as it needs to be, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report is the annual review of information government practices requested by members. It forms part of the ongoing commitment to the Fire Authority service in regards to data protection and transparency. The report covers the period of 2021 to 2022. and I really just will focus on the very pertinent points. The very pertinent points is that we receive, as part of statutory requirements, freedom of information requests, and we are required to publish information about activities, and we're also required to respond to requests from the members of the public. During the period that is covered as the report, we received 104 freedom of information requests. In comparison to previous years, the previous year was 108, so it's pretty consistent. Contained within the report is details around, or give some very broad headings of what that information requests cover. Importantly, we've responded to 85% of the freedom of information requests within 20 working days. The Information Commissioner does set a target of 90%, but however does recognise the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the effect that this might have on public bodies to respond to information. However, we will endeavour to drive forward an improvements in that area. Another important aspect is the environmental information requests. Very quickly, it's similar sort of responsibility to the freedom of information, but during the report period, we've had no information requests, so I quickly move on from that. Data protection, as you very much will be aware and very much supportive of, the protection of data, particularly personal information, is of critical importance to not only individuals but also to the way that we conduct our business and how we conduct our business. And you'll be very much aware through the media that focus in terms of breaches, the fact that failure to manage data protection and individuals' information is reported negatively, and it undermines the confidence in authorities. So it's pleasing again to report that the service has had no need to report any discrepancies to the Information Commissioner during the period of this report. Lastly, as part of this report, keeping it as brief, we do have powers under the Regulation of Investor Powers Act, which is commonly known as RIPA, and during the period of this report, we have not had to use the powers in any way, so there's nothing to report with regard.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Fire Officer Sharman. Any other comments or questions on the report? I'm not seeing any indications. We're asked to note the report. All those in favour?
Agreed.
Agreed, yeah. Thank you, colleagues. The next item on the agenda then is the Environment and Sustainability Policy Statement, and I think this is Assistant Chief Fire Officer Sharman again.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a very concise report. This is the annual review of the services Environmental and Sustainability Policy Statement, and the crux of the report is to ensure that our commitment to, and the policy is reviewed and it is still current. Details within the report, particularly in 2.4, set out the commitments that members have previously agreed that form part of our CRMP, our Community Risk Management Plan. There is a specific strategic goal within the CRMP that really focuses our mind on environmental sustainability. The details are in the report, and really seeking members' approval and really demonstrate our intent and commitment to both environmental and sustainability policies moving forward.
Thank you very much. Mick, any comments or questions from colleagues on the Environment and Sustainability Policy Statement and report?
Thank you.
So the recommendations are that members endorse the policy statement to reaffirm their commitment to matters relating to environment and sustainability. Colleagues happy to approve?
Agreed.
It's agreed, I think. Yeah. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you, Mick. Item 8 then is our health and safety policy statement of intent, and I think again this is Assistant Chief Officer Sharman.
He's on a roll,
On a roll. I'm on a roll. You get a hat-trick.
This report is even concise, even greater level in terms of how concise it is. And this really is presented to members our ongoing commitment an intent to provide a safe working environment, not only for the individuals that work for the authority, but also individuals that could be affected by the activities undertaken by the service. The review is a periodic review and is carried out in conjunction with our health and safety management in terms of and management of risk, and our continued review of practices and activities that we undertake. A copy of the policy is on page 28, and I will keep it really brief. It just really is about underpinning our future commitment to providing a safe working environment for people, people within the service and people affected by our activities.
Thank you, Mick. The recommendation is that members endorse the content of the updated written health and safety policy to reaffirm their commitment to effective health and safety risk management for employees and others who are affected by the service's activities. And with the recommendations, any comments or questions?
I'll need to say at the end it says 16th of September for this to change it.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey.
Observation back and
Thank you, Councillor Bailey.
I've had some of that.
Extra brownie points for you, Councillor Bailey. Eagle-eyed in the report.
No.
All those in favour of the recommendations?
Agreed.
No, agreed, yeah. Thank you, colleagues. Item, I think it becomes effectively item 10, was item 9. Very good news story. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services Inspection Report. Chief Fire Officer.
Yeah, Mick's going to go through some of these bits. No, it's fine, Chair. I suppose I said it in the Futures 2025 thing, it's important. I suppose one of the sad things about such a good news story, it's being overshadowed by the fact we're having to make cuts to the organisation. But I've been here a long time in this Fire and Rescue Service, and the first one we did, we learned some lessons by it. We're still learning lessons in terms of the process around HMI and all those kind of things. And regardless of what we've discussed here to members and the ongoing challenges, we will work tirelessly to make sure that we can maintain wherever we can a good rating. That will clearly be a challenge. What I would sort of go on record say, I need to pay my thanks to every single member of staff in this organisation that got us to that place. They work tirelessly for us, and they certainly speak very openly and candidly about the efforts and the performance. We do have a far more performance focus now, which is a really important thing. But as I say, we've not had time enough, really, I think, to celebrate the fact we got good. In the world of negativity, it's been one of those sort of things, those light bulb moments that have come on thinking we need to spend some time to celebrate the good things that we're doing. But I'll pass on to Mick.
Thank you very much, Chief. Mick?
Keep it precise. But the service was inspected by the Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary back in October 21. However, due to the various processes that they need to undertake, the final report didn't land with us until 27th of July. So, unfortunately, this is the first opportunity we've had to bring it back to members. And I will just cover some of the personal points because it is a good news story. So I just really want to point out and sort of take members back to our original inspection was 2018, where there was an overall grading of requires improvement, and that was across all three pillars of areas of infection. That was both efficiency, effectiveness and people. And as a result of that, the HMIC identified 24 areas of improvement. It's really pleasing to be able to report that, as both the Chair and the Chief have already alluded to, that the service has now been graded good. And that is graded good in all 11 areas of the assessment. And really, we shouldn't underplay, it demonstrates significant improvements across all areas. And as the Chief Fire Officer says, that significant improvement is a result of the work that both members and individuals across the workforce have undertaken to drive forward and take ownership of the areas that have been reported back to us. Just for context, the service, Nottingham Fire and Rescue Service, is one of 4 services from round 2 that received good across all areas of inspection. There is more detail within the report that highlights the areas that the inspectors have identified that a very positive reflection on the service. The bit I also feel I'd like to draw to your attention
Superb. Thank you very much for walking us through the report, Mick. And let me just add, I think on behalf of the entire authority, what an absolutely outstanding achievement this is. I mean, to have moved from requires improvement across all of the main theme pillars. Yes, we had some goods within those theme pillars in specific areas, but quite a lot of requires improvement within a few short years to be good across the board. And the remarkable point, which is worth reiterating, that you made, Mick, which is that we have the second lowest number of areas for improvement issued to any service to date. And as you rightly said, we only have 4 out of 481 that have been issued areas for improvement across those inspections. It is a remarkable achievement by everybody within the service. And actually, I should also put on record my personal thanks to the authority for the way in which the authority scrutinised the AFIs, which is the same process that we're suggesting again this time. And I think the point that the Chief makes is a point well made at a time when the pressure is on, particularly financially, and the pressure has been on the service in terms of some of the challenges that we've had both nationally and locally in terms of response. I think it's absolutely remarkable that we've achieved what we've achieved collectively as an organisation, but specifically what every single member of the team, the staff at Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service have achieved and should be commended. And I would ask the Chief Fire Officer to make sure that our appreciation and thanks as an entire fire authority are conveyed to every single member of staff, and that they're congratulated for their efforts. Any other contributions, Councillor Wheeler?
Yeah, just to echo your comments, I think absolutely to see from where we were, which I know was disappointing to everyone at the time, I think just shows the drive and resolve of our staff to get there to be at a good standard, and we should absolutely celebrate that. Absolutely agree the communication staff and make sure our banners saying good are everywhere, right in the middle of the foyer, which I'm sure the Commissioner will completely agree at the Joint HQ. We can have that right bang in the middle of the foyer to celebrate it and to make absolutely that point. That's where we are, and the fact that we're not just waiting to stand still at good. We are making that commitment to drive for even better. I'd love to get an outstanding there if we can, but to keep pushing to be even better so we can have it on paper how good we know our service is, even though we all know how good it is in this room.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. I'll move that. Councillor Neil?
I just want to quickly say I'm lucky to be at this meeting as a sub for it, because this was an underlying issue over the last few years, and the amount of work that went in from staff, as well as doing their average job. So it's brilliant news. They were teasing it at the beginning of the year, weren't they, in terms of what the results were, but it's nice to finally see it out in the open, and I've got to say it's an incredible result. So just want to pass on my thanks to staff.
I will certainly do that on behalf of the authority report, Chair.
Thank you very much. Recommendations are that we note the outcome of HMIC FRS inspection and the progress made by the service, and that secondly we acknowledge the 4 areas for improvement highlighted by HMIC FRS and approve governance and scrutiny through the Fire Authority Committee structures, which colleagues will be familiar with. I'll move the recommendations. Colleagues happy to agree those recommendations?
Agreed.
They're approved. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you, Mick. The next item is item 11, I think, effectively now in our report, which is Treasury Management Annual Report 2021-22, and I think our Chief Finance Officer and Treasurer Becky is going to introduce the report.
Yeah, just be quite quick. So Fire Authority are required to receive reports on their services, borrowing, investments and cash activity at the end of each financial year under the Local Government Act. There's quite a lot of detail in the report, and I'm willing to sort of expand on that if people want. But if I can just turn you to page 42, which has got a table of all the prudential indicators that were approved by Fire Authority as part of the Treasury Management Strategy. They're all within, none of the boundaries have been exceeded, everything's in hand. I will just point you to the estimate of total capital expenditure, the second indicator in. The 5.8 million was the budget for capital expenditure. We spent slightly more than that, down to slippage from the previous year, from 2021, so that's why that one was exceeded. And then the very last one, the investment yield benchmark, and we do sort of judge ourselves against a 3-month LIBOR rate, and we're slightly below that, and that's mostly because our cash deposits are placed with very secure cash institutions, and we have the amount that we have does prevent us from investing with some of the very large institutions. So our performance is slightly below that in the last year. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Commissioner Henry.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the cash position and usable reserves, please, Becky. What is the percentage of reserves as compared with the annual budget, and what is the recommendation? You know, what envelope should you have the reserves at?
Yeah, so we have reserves in the region of £10 million. So that's probably about 20% of our annual budget, our gross annual budget.
Yeah.
SIPFA don't recommend a percentage. It is based on the risk that we feel that we need to hold reserves for, and that risk is assessed as part of the Treasury Management Strategy. We have a reserve strategy which is included in the Treasury Management Strategy approved by this authority in February of each year. So we set ourselves a minimum general fund reserve of £4.5 million to protect us against perceived risk. We also hold earmarked reserves in excess of that. A lot of that is from a grant that we receive in the previous year, where the activity runs across the year end. We have funding for the emergency services network, for example.
I know all about that.
I'm sure you do. So activity on that has been delayed, so we do hold some of our reserves for that, and for the mobilising system, for example, and for equipment. So in the Futures 25 programme, there was a table of our earmarked reserves in the financial implications. So we do have. So that takes up most of the earmarked reserves. We did set aside 936,000 for budget support, knowing that we were coming up to some difficult years when we set the budget in February, and a further 900,000 to help us implement the Futures 25, because we are having to put some resources into work out what the best options are. And also for consultation, and also should there be any redundancy costs, they would need to come out of that reserve. So that's the purpose of that one. So I did review the reserves where we are, and we've got those two, and we're proposing that we would need to use the 936,000 next year if our projections are correct. And then there is a surplus of about 900,000 in the general fund reserve, which I'm trying to protect, because we know that the uncertainty is projected forward into more than just next year. So if we were required to use some of the earmarked reserves to reallocate some of those, it would have an impact on things like our ability to deliver the mobilising system going forward, which is in need of replacement at the moment. So when we get a bit closer come February, when we approve your reserve strategy, we'll be looking at that a bit further, and I'll bring more information.
Thank you very much.
Before members. in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Becky. In headline terms, Commissioner, because I think this is a really important point for public transparency, we carry 10 million reserves. 5.4 million is in our general fund reserve, which you'll be familiar with your own budget. 4.6 million is earmarked within that 10 million. And within that 4.6 million that is earmarked, so essentially half of what we carry, just shy of half, we're already committing to 1 million to underpin the decisions that we made earlier. So we're using 1 million of our earmarked reserves, and we're required, the general fund reserve is 5.4. We're required by our own policy based on risk to have 4.5. So we've not got much room for manoeuvre. Just above 4.5.
That's really helpful, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this report? No. The recommendation is then that members note the update on Treasury management activity during the 2021-22 financial year as required under the Local Government Act 2023. I'll move the recommendations. Colleagues, happy to agree the recommendations?
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, colleagues. The final report then is Principal Officer Establishment. This is going to be introduced by, which is a report we asked the Chief to bring back, you'll remember, in terms of the principal team. So I think relatively straightforward for colleagues who have read the report, but I'll ask the Chief Fire Officer just to touch on the key points in the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, I'm mindful it's been a long session for members, so keep it as brief as you can. When you agreed to appoint me and confirm me as your Chief Fire Officer, at the same time in the process, the Appointments Committee involving the Chair and others, it was decided that you'd implement a temporary structure, so I was your Deputy Chief Fire Officer. The decision was that you'd run with a temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer. That was a time for the new Chief Fire Officer and me to review what we felt was right, work with the Chair and others about what you think is required in terms of authority appointed officers. My assessment in the report basically is, at the moment, I feel that you need the capacity of 3 at the moment. But with making some adjustments, we've had Mick Sharman, who continues in a temporary at the moment as Assistant Chief Fire Officer. My view from an operational and capacities perspective, that it works as it is. There are some work we're going to have to do if it's substantiated today in terms of the deletion and the establishment around documents that say DCFO in it. What do you do as members if the Chief Fire Officer is incapacitated for long periods of time? Well, clearly you're going to have to come up with a process where you put somebody in post temporarily. But we're going to have to do that and working with Malcolm around your constitution and your scheme of delegations and those kind of things. So there are some changes and some knock-ons about how it's done and who's nominated in things. I also took a view over the last 5 months of being your Chief Fire Officer that I've just presented a report that talks about £6 million of cuts, and we're on making those efficiencies. And there was an opportunity there for me in terms of that to make some efficiencies. And as I said earlier in the efficiencies paper, there's £80,000 over the first 3 years and then £20,000 subject to all pay increments and everything else. So the recommendation is we delete the Deputy Chief Fire Officer role and we substantively create an Assistant Chief Fire Officer role. In the report, and I've had a conversation with that of our people, we'd be looking, if approved today, to go out to some kind of advert in December with a view that a paper would come to February's Fire Authority for confirmation of appointment of that post. Notwithstanding, if it's an internal candidate, then that's a little bit more straightforward. If it's an external candidate, we might be subject to notice periods and all those kind of things. However, as from what I understand, Nick, your temporary runs till April anyway. So I've tried to programme it in so there'll be a bit of a smooth transition period. And of course, the recommendations are to create and delete, and also for the Chief Officer to support the Appointments Committee really to get that process underway. And that's all I'd say on that, Chair, really.
Very much, Chief. Any comments or questions, Councillor Wheeler?
No, just say completely agree with that in terms of what's put forward. I think it's absolutely right. We look at where we can not just make cuts, but where we've identified the system works as now. And, you know, my thank goes to Mick, I know in particular with the Council of Fire, with the leadership he showed there on the day there, and what we've seen since in this difficult period that the system works. I mean, the only question we had was around the, if you were unfortunately incapacitated about the, or in the Constitution, but obviously Paul Converse and the Clerk as well, and putting something together, we're happy to support. And of course, we know it will depend on who's in that role in terms of their experience and who, and then of course who wants to delegate to there. So we're happy to work beyond that and yeah, welcome the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wheeler. Any other comments or questions? Recommendations are that we agree to the deletion of the Deputy Chief Fire Officer DCFO post and the creation of a substantive ACFO, that's Assistant Chief Fire Officer post, and that we task the Chief Fire Officer with supporting the authority in the recruitment of an Assistant Chief Fire Officer in accordance with the report set out. And with the recommendations.
Agreed.
All those happy to agree? Yep, they're agreed. Thank you very much, colleagues. That is the end of our formal agenda. Thank you to everybody for the way that they've conducted today's debate, and
Interesting.
particular thank you to Highfields Fire Station.